Section 13 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 13, The Snaring of Jacobea. The great forest was so silent, so lonely. The aisles of a vast church could have been no more sanctified by holy stillness. Even the summer wind that trembled in the upper boughs of the huge trees had not penetrated their thick branches and intertwined leaves, so that the grass and flowers were standing erect, untroubled by a breath of air, and the sun that dazzled without on the town of Frankfurt did not touch the glowing green gloom of the forest. Seated low on the grass by a wayside shrine that held a little figure of the Madonna, Natalie the witch, hunched together in a brown cloak, looked keenly into the depths of cool shade between the tree trunks. She was watching the distant figure of a lady tremble into sight among the leaves of the undergrowth, a lady who walked hesitatingly and fearfully. As she drew near, the witch could see that the long yellow dress she held up was torn and soiled, and that her hair hung disarranged on her shoulders. Breathing in a quick, fatigued manner, she came towards the shrine, but seeing the witch she stopped abruptly, and her grey eyes darkened with apprehension. "What is amiss with Jacobea of Martzburg?" asked the witch in her expressionless way, "that she walks the forest disarrayed and alone?" "I am lost," answered Jacobea, shrinking. "How do you know me?" "By your face," said Natalie. "How is it you are lost?" "Will you tell me the way to Frankfurt?" asked Jacobea wearily. "I have walked since noon. I was accompanying the Empress from the tournament, and my horse broke away with me. I slipped from the saddle. Now I have lost him." Natalie smiled faintly. "Let me tell your fortune," said the witch, slowly rising. "You have a curious fortune, and I will reveal it without gold or silver." "No," Jacobea's voice was agitated. "I have no credence in those things. I will pay you to show me the way out of the forest." But the witch had crossed softly to her side, and to her manifest shrinking terror caught hold of her hand. "What do you imagine you hold in your palm?" she smiled. Jacobea endeavoured to draw her hand away. The near presence of the woman quickened her unnamed terror. "Lands and castles," said the witch, while her fingers tightened on the striving wrist. "Gold and loneliness." "You know me," answered Jacobea in anger. "There is no magic in this. Let me go." The witch dropped the lady's hand and smoothed her own together. "I do not need the lines in your palm to tell me your fortune," she said sharply. "I know more of you than you would care to hear, Jacobea of Martzburg." The lady turned away and stepped quickly but aimlessly down the shaded glade. Natalie, dragging her brown cloak, came lightly after. "You cannot escape," she said. "You may walk in and out of the trees until you die of weariness, yet never find your way to Frankfurt." "Who are you?" cried the lady, with a touch of desperation in her faint voice. "And what do you want with me?" The witch licked her pale lips. "Come with me, and I will show you." "To what end should I go with you?" exclaimed Jacobea. "I know you not, and God help me, I mistrust you." The witch shot a scornful glance over the lady's tall figure, supple with the strength of youth. "What evil could I do you?" she asked. Jacobea considered her intently. Indeed, she was small, seemed frail also. Jacobea's white fingers could have crushed the life out of her lean throat. Still she was reluctant. "To what end?" she repeated. Natalie did not answer, but turned into a grass-grown path that twisted through the trees, and Jacobea, afraid of the loneliness, followed her slowly. As they went through the forest, the green, still forest, with no flower to vary the clinging creepers and great blossomless plants, with no sound of bird or insect to mingle with their light tread and the sweep of their garments on the ground. Jacobea was aware that her senses were being dulled and drugged with the silence and the strangeness. She felt no longer afraid or curious. After a while they came upon a pool lying in a hollow and grown about with thick dark ferns. The sunless waters were black and dull. On the surface of them floated some dead leaves and the vivid, unwholesome green of a tangled weed. A young man in plain dark dress was seated on the opposite bank. On his knees was an open book, and his long straight hair hung either side of his face and brushed the yellow page. Behind him stood the shattered trunk of a blasted tree, grown with fan-shaped fungi of brilliant scarlet and blotched purple and orange that glowed gorgeously in the universal cold, soft greenness. "Oh, me," murmured Jacobea. The young man lifted his eyes from the book and looked at her across the black water. Jacobea would have fled, would have flung herself into the forest with no thought but that of escape from those eyes gazing at her over the pages of that ancient volume. But the witch's loathsome little hands closed on hers with a marvellous strength and drew her, shuddering, round the edge of the pond. The youth shut the book, stretched his slender limbs, and half turning on his side lay and watched. Jacobea's noble and lovely figure, clothed in a thick soft velvet of a luminous yellow hue, her blonde hair straying on her shoulders and mingling with the glowing tint of her gown, her grave and sweet face, lit and guarded by grey eyes, soft and frightened, made a fair picture against the sombre background of the dark wood. A picture marred only by the insignificant and drab-coloured figure of the little witch who held her hand and dragged her through the dank grass. "Do you remember me?" asked the youth. Jacobea turned her head away. "Let go of her, Nathalie," continued the youth impatiently. He rested his elbow on the closed book and propped his chin on his hand. His eyes rested eagerly and admiringly on the lady's shuddering fairness. "She will run," said Nathalie, but she loosened her hold. Jacobea did not stir. She shook the hand that Nathalie had held and caressed it with the other. The young man put back his heavy hair. "Do you know me?" She slowly turned her face, pearl pale above the glowing colour of her dress. "Yes, you came to my castle for shelter once." Dirk did not lower his intense, ardent gaze. "Well, how did I reward your courtesy? I told you something." She would not answer. "I told you something," repeated Dirk, "and you have not forgotten it." "Let me go," she said. "I do not know who you are nor what you mean. Let me go." She turned as if to move away, but sank instead onto one of the moss-covered boulders that edged the pond, and clasped her fingers over the shining locks straying across her bosom. "You have never been the same since that time you sheltered me," said Dirk. She stiffened with dread and pride. "Ye are some evil thing," she said. Her glance was fierce for the passive witch. "Why was I brought here?" "Because it was my wish," answered Dirk gravely. "Your horse does not often carry you away, Jacobea of Martzburg, and leave you in a trackless forest." The lady started at his knowledge. "That also was my will," said Dirk. "Your will?" she echoed. Dirk smiled, with an ugly show of his teeth. "Belike the horse was bewitched. Have ye not heard such a thing?" "Santa Maria!" she cried. "You have given a youth I know a post at court," he said. "Why?" Jacobea shivered and could not move. She looked drearily at the black water and the damp masses of fern. then with a slow horror at the figure of the young man seated under the blasted tree. " I do not know," she answered weakly. " I never disliked him." " As ye did me?" added Dirk. " Maybe I had no cause to love you," she returned, goaded. " Why did you ever come to my castle? Why did I ever see you?" She put her cold hand over her eyes. " No matter for that," mocked Dirk. " So ye liked my comrade Theirry?" She answered, as if forced against her will. " Well enough I liked him. Was he not pleasured to encounter me again? And since he was doing nought, I — but why do you question me? Can it be that you are jealous?" The young man pulled his heavy brows together. " Am I a silly maid to be jealous? Meddle not with things ye cannot measure. It had been better for you had you never seen my comrade's fair face — ay, and for me also," and he frowned. " Surely he is free to do as he may list," returned Jacobea. " If he choose to come to court "" If ye choose to tempt him," answered Dirk. " But enough of that." He rose and leant against the tree. Above his slender shoulder rose the jagged tongue of grey wood and the smooth colour of the clustering fungi, and beyond that the forest sank into immense depths of still gloom. Jacobea strove desperately with her dull dread and terror, but it seemed to her as if a sickly vapour was rising from the black pool that chilled her to horror. She could not escape Dirk's steady eyes that were like bright stones in his smooth face. " Come here," he said. Jacobea made no movement to obey until the witch clutched her arm, then she shook off the clinging fingers and approached the spot where Dirk waited. " I think you have bewitched me," she said drearily. " Not I — another has done that," he answered. " Certes, ye are slow in mating, Jacobea of Martzburg." A little shuddering breath stirred her parted lips. She looked to right and left, saw nothing but the enclosing forest, and turned her frightened eyes on Dirk. " I know some little magic," he continued. " Shall I show you the man you wish to make Lord of Martzburg?" " There is no one," she said feebly. " You lie," he answered, " as I could prove." " As you cannot prove," she returned, clasping her hands together. " Why did your steward come with ye to Frankfort," answered Dirk, " and his wife stay as chatelaine of Martzburg? It had been more fitting had he remained. What reward will he receive for his service as your henchman at court?" " What reward do you imagine I should offer?" she answered very slowly. " I cannot tell," said Dirk, with a hot force behind every word, " for I do not know if you are a fool or no. But this I know — the man waits a word from you." " Stop," said Jacobea. But Dirk continued ruthlessly. " He waits, I tell you." " Oh God, for what?" she cried. " For you to say. You think me fair, Sebastian, you know me rich, and all my life shall prove me loving, and only a red browed woman in Martzburg Castle prevents you coming from my footstool to my side. Said you that he would take horse to morrow for Martzburg and return a free man." The handkerchief fell from Jacobea's fingers and fluttered on the dark ferns. " You are a fiend," she said in a sick voice. " You cannot be human to so touch my heart, and you are wrong. I dare tell you in the name of God that you are wrong. Those evil thoughts have never come to me." " In the name of the devil I am right," smiled Dirk. " The devil! Ye are one of his agents," she cried in a trembling defiance. " Or how could you guess what I scarcely knew until ye came that baleful night — what he never knew till then? Ah, I swear it, he never dreamt that I — never dreamt what my favour meant, but now — his eyes — I cannot mistake them." He is a dutiful servant," said Dirk. "He waits for his mistress to speak." Jacobea sank to her knees on the grass. "I entreat you to forbear," she whispered. "Whoever you are, whatever your object, I ask your mercy. I am very unhappy. Do not goad me, drive me further." Dirk stepped forward and caught her drooping shoulders in his firm hands. "Pious fool!" he cried. "How long do you think you can endure this? How long do you think he will remain the servant when he knows he might be the master?" She averted her agonized face. "Then it was from you he learnt it — you!" Dirk interrupted hotly. "He knows, remember that. He knows, and he waits. Already he hates the woman who keeps him dumb. It were very easily done. One look, some few words — ye would not find him slow of understanding." He loosened his grasp on her, and Jacobea fell forward and clasped his feet. "I implore you, take back this wickedness. I am weak. Since my first sight of you I have been striving against your influence that is killing me. Man or demon, I beseech you, let me be." She raised her face, the slow bitter tears forced out of her sweet worn eyes. Her hair fell like golden embroidery over the yellow gown, and her fingers fluttered on her unhappy bosom. Dirk considered her curiously and coldly. "I am neither man nor demon," he said, "but this I tell you. As surely as he is more to you than your own soul, so surely you are lost." "Lost, lost," she repeated, and half raised herself. "Certes, therefore get the price of your soul," he mocked. "What is the woman to you? A cold-hearted jade, as good dead now as 50 years hence? What is one sin the more? I tell you, while you set that man's image up in your heart before that of God, ye are lost already." He stepped back and clapped his hands. "I promised you a sight of your lover," he said. "Now let him speak for himself." Jacobea turned her head sharply. A few feet away from her stood Sebastian, holding back the heavy boughs and looking at her. She gave a shriek and rose swiftly. Dirk and the witch had disappeared. If they had slipped into the undergrowth and were yet near, they gave no answer when she wildly called to them. The vast forest seemed utterly empty, save for the silent figure of Sebastian. Not doubting now that Dirk was some evil being whom her own wicked thoughts had evoked, believing that the appearance of her steward was some phantom sent for her undoing, she, unfortunate, distracted with misery and terror, turned with a shuddering relief to the oblivion of the still pool. Hastening with trembling feet through the clinging weeds and ferns, she climbed down the damp bank and would have cast herself into the dull water, when she heard his voice calling her, a human voice. She paused, lending a fearful ear to the sound while the water rippled from her foot. "It is I," he called. "My lady, it is I." This was Sebastian himself. No delusion, nor ghost, but her living steward, as she had seen him this morning in his brown riding habit, wearing her gold and blue colours round his hat. She mastered her terror and confusion. "Indeed, you frightened me." A lie rose to save her. "I thought it some robber. I did not know you." "I have been searching for you," said Sebastian. "We came upon your horse on the high road, and then upon your gloves in the grass. So, as no rider could come among these trees on foot, I sought for you. I am glad that you are safe." This calm and carefully ordered speech gave her time to gather courage. She fumbled at her bosom, drew forth a crucifix and clutched it to her lips with a murmur of passionate prayers. He could not but notice this. He must perceive her soiled, torn dress, her wild face, her white exhaustion, but he gave no sign of it. " It was a fortunate chance that sent me here," he said gravely. " The wood is so vast." " Ay, so vast," she answered. " Know you the way out, Sebastian?" " Have you met no one?" he asked. She hesitated. If he had encountered neither the woman nor the young man, then they were indeed wizards or of some unearthly race, she could not bring herself to speak of them. " No," she answered at length. She gathered up her long skirt and shook off the withered leaves that clung to it. " Will you lead the way?" she said. He turned and moved ahead of her down the narrow path by which he had come. As she followed him, she heard his foot fall soft on the thick grass, and the swishing sound of the straying boughs as he held them back for her to pass, till she found the silence so unendurable that she nerved herself to break it. But several times she gathered her strength in vain for the effort, and when at last some foolish words had come to her lips, he suddenly looked back over his shoulder and checked her speech. " 'Tis strange that your horse should have gone mad in such a manner," he said. " But he found him?" she faltered. " Ay, a man found him, exhausted and trembling like a thing bewitched." Her heart gave a great leap. Had he used that word by chance? " Ye were not hurt, my lady, when ye were thrown?" said the steward. " No," said Jacobea. " No." Silence again. No bird nor butterfly disturbed the sombre stillness of the wood. No breeze stirred the thick leaves that surrounded them. Gradually the path widened until it brought them into a great space grown with ferns and overarched with trees. Then Sebastian paused. " Ye must rest, certes, it is folly to persist," he added with some authority. She seated herself, lifting the hand that held the crucifix to her bosom. Gazing down into the clusters of ferns at his feet, he spoke. " I think I must return to Martzburg," he said. She braced herself, making a gesture with her hand as if she would ward off his words. " You know that you are free to do what you will, Sebastian." " Is it not better that I should go?" he challenged her with a full sideways glance. " I do not know," she said desperately, " why you put this to me here and now." " I do not often see you alone." She opened her hand to stare down at the crucifix in her palm. " You can leave Frankfort when you wish — why not?" she said. He faced her quickly. " But I may come back?" It seemed to Jacobea that he echoed Dirk's words. The crucifix slipped through her trembling fingers on to the grass. " What do you mean? Oh, Sebastian, what do you mean?" The words were forced from her, but uttered under her breath. She added instantly in a more courageous voice, " Go and come as you list — are you not free?" He saw the crucifix at her feet and picked it up, but she drew back as he came near and held out her hand. He put the crucifix into it, frowning, his eyes dark and bright with excitement. " Do you recall the 2 students who were housed that night in Martzburg?" he asked. " Yes," she said. " Is not one now at court?" " I would mean the other — the boy," answered Sebastian. She averted her face and drooped until the ends of her hair touched her knees. " I met him again to day," continued the steward, with a curious lift in his voice. " Here in this forest, while searching for you. He spoke to me." Certainly the devil was enmeshing her. Surely he had brought her to this pass, sent Sebastian of all men to find her in her weariness and loneliness. And Sebastian knew also that she knew. Outspoken words between them could be hardly more intolerable shame than this. "He is cunning beyond most," said the steward. Jacobea lifted her head. "He is an enchanter, a wizard. Do not listen to him. Do not speak to him. As you value your soul, Sebastian, do not think of him." "As I value some other things," he answered grimly. "I must both listen to him and consider what he says." She rose. "We will go our way. I cannot talk with you now, Sebastian." But he stood in her path. "Let me journey to Martzburg," he said thickly. "One word, I shall understand you." She glanced and saw him extraordinarily keen and moved. He was Lord of Martzburg. Could he but get her to pledge herself? In his eagerness, however, he forgot advice. "Tell her," said Dirk, "you have adored her for years in secret." This escaped his keenness, for though his wife was nothing to him compared with his ambition, he had no tenderness for Jacobea. Had he remembered to feign it, he might have triumphed, and now, but though her gentle heart believed he held her dear, that he did not say so made firmness possible for her. "You shall stay in Frankfort," she said with sudden strength. "Sybilla asks my return," he said, gazing at her passionately. "Do we not understand each other without words?" "The fiend has bewitched you also," she answered fearfully. "You know too much, you guess too much, and yet I tell you nothing, and I also am bewitched, for I cannot reply to you as I should." "I have been silent long," he said, "but I have dared to think. Had I been free, as I can be free." The crucifix was forgotten in her hand. "We do evil to talk like this," she said, half fainting. "You will bid me go to Martzburg," he insisted, and took her long cold fingers. She raised her eyes to the boughs above her. "No, no." Then, "God, have compassion on me," she said. The thick foliage stirred. Jacobea felt as if the bars of a cage were being broken about her. She turned her head, and a little colour flushed her cheek. Through the silvery stems of the larches came some knights and a page boy, members of the party left to search for her. She moved towards them. She hailed them almost gaily. None save Sebastian saw her as they turned towards Frankfort, raise the crucifix and press her lips to it. End of section 13. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 14 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 14, The Snaring of Thierry. Dirk and the witch kept company until they reached the gates of Frankfort. There the young man took his own way through the busy town, and Nathalie slipped aside into the more retired streets. Many of the passers-by saluted Dirk, some halted to speak with him. The brilliant young doctor of rhetoric, with a reputation made fascinating by an air of mystery, was a desired acquaintance among the people of Frankfort. He returned their greetings pleasantly, yet absently. He was thinking of Jacobea of Martzburg, whom he had left behind in the great forest, and considering what chances there might be, either for Thierry or Sybilla, the steward's wife. He passed the tall red front of the college, where the quiet trees tapped their leaves against the arched windows, turned over the narrow curved bridge that spanned the steadily flowing water of the Main, and came to the thick walls surrounding the Emperor's castle. There, for a moment, he paused and looked thoughtfully up at the imperial flag that fluttered softly against the evening sky. When he passed on, it was with a cheerful step and a whistling little tune under his breath. A few moments brought him to the long street where the witch lived, a few more to her gate, and then his face lit and changed wonderfully, for ahead of him was Thierry. Flushed and panting, he ran to his friend's side and touched him on the arm. Theirry turned, his hand on the latch. His greeting was hurried, half shamefaced. "My master and most of the court were at the tourney today," he said. "I thought it safe to come." Dirk withdrew his hand, and his eyes narrowed. "Ah, ye are beginning to be circumspect how ye visit here." "You word it unkindly," answered Theirry hastily. "Let us enter the house where we can talk at ease." They passed into the witch's dwelling, and to the room at the back that looked into the garden of red roses. The windows were set wide, and the scented softness of the evening filled the half-darkened chamber. Dirk lit a little lamp that had a green glass, and by the faint flame of it gazed long and lingeringly at Theirry. He found his friend richly dressed in black and crimson, wearing an enamel chain round his bonnet, and a laced shirt showing at his bosom. He found the glowing bright charm of his face disturbed by some embarrassment or confusion, the beautiful mouth uneasily set, the level brows slightly frowning. "Oh, Theirry," he cried in a half mournful yearning, "come back to me, come back." "I am very well at court," was the quick answer. "My master is gentle, and my tasks easy." "Very clearly can I see ye are well, and very well at court. Seldom do you leave it." "I find it difficult to get here often," said Theirry. "Ye find it difficult," said Dirk, "because your desires chain you to the court. I think ye are a faithless friend." "That am not I. Ye know more of me than any man. I care more for ye than for any man." "Or woman," added Dirk dryly. An impatient colour came into Theirry's cheeks. He looked resolutely at the red roses. "That is unworthy in you, Dirk. Is it disloyal to you to know a lady, to admire a lady, to strive to serve and please a lady?" He turned his charming face, and in his effort to conciliate, his voice was gentle and winning. "Truly, she is the sweetest of her kind, Dirk. If you knew her, evil is abashed before her." "Then it is as well I do not know her," Dirk retorted grimly. "Strangely ye talk. You and I know we are not saints, but belike you would reform. Belike a second time ye have repented." Theirry seemed in some agitation. "No, no, have I gone too far? Do I not still hope to gain something, perhaps everything?" He paused, then added in a low voice, "But I wish I had never laid hands on the monk. I wish I had not touched God his money. And when I see her, I cannot prevent my heart from smarting at the thought of what I am." "How often do you see her?" asked Dirk quietly. "But seldom," answered Theirry sadly. "And it is better. What could I ever be to her?" Dirk smiled sombrely. "That is true. Yet you would waste your life dallying round the places where you may sometimes see her face." Theirry bit his lip. "Oh, you think me a fool, to falter, to regret. But what have my sins ever done for me? There are many honest men better placed than I, and without the prospect of hell to blast their souls." Dirk looked at him with lowering eyes. "You had been content had you not met this lady." "Enough of her," answered Theirry wearily. "You make too much of it. I do not think I love her, but one who is fallen must view such sweetness, such gentle purity with sorrow, yea, with yearning. Maybe she is neither so pure nor so gentle as you think." "Certes, she is as but other women as one day ye may see." Theirry turned from the window half in protest, half in excuse. "Cannot you understand how one may hold a fair thing dear? How one might worship, even love?" "Yes," answered Dirk, and his great eyes were bright and misty. "But if I loved," he spoke the word beautifully and rose as he uttered it, "I would so grapple her soul to mine that we should be together to all eternity. Nor devil nor angel should divide us. But there is no need to talk of that. There are other matters to deal with." "Would I had never seen the evil books, or never seen her face," said Theirry restlessly. "So at least I had been undivided in my thoughts." He came to the table and looked at Dirk across the sickly, struggling flame of the lamp. In his hazel eyes was an expression of appeal, the call of the weak to the strong, and the other held out his hands impulsively. "Ah, I am a fool to trouble with ye, my friend," he said, and his voice broke with tenderness. "For ye are headstrong and unstable, and care not for me one jot. I warrant me, yet you may do what you will with this silly heart of mine." There was a grace, a wistful affection in his face, in his words, in his gesture of outstretched hands, that instantly moved Theirry, ever quick to respond. He took the young doctor's slender fingers in a warm clasp. They were very quickly withdrawn. Dirk had a notable dislike to a touch, but his deep eyes smiled. "I have somewhat to tell you," he said, "at which your impatience will be pleased." He went lightly to a press in the wall and brought forth a mighty candlestick of red copper, branched and engraved. 3 half-burnt candles remained in the sockets. He lit these, and the room was filled with a brighter and pleasanter light. Setting the candlestick on the table where it glowed over Theirry's splendid presence, he returned to the cupboard and took out a tall bottle of yellow wine, and 2 glasses with milk-white lines round the rims. Theirry seated himself at the table, pulled off his gloves, and smoothed his hair back from his face. "Have you seen the Empress?" asked Dirk, pouring out the wine. "Yea," answered Theirry without interest. "She is very beautiful?" "Certes, but of a cloying sweetness. There is no touch of nobility in her." Dirk held the wine out across the table and seated himself. "I have heard she is ambitious," he said. "Ay, she gives the Emperor no rest, for ever urging him to Rome to be crowned by the Pope as Emperor of the West. But he better loves the North and has no spirit to rule in Italy." "The nobles chafe at his inaction?" asked Dirk. "'Tis not idle questioning." "Mostly, I think. Do we not all have golden dreams of Rome? Balthasar, ye mind him, he is Margrave of East Flanders now, since his father was killed at the boar hunt, and powerful, he is mad to cross the Alps. He has great influence with the Emperor. Indeed, I think he loves him." Dirk set down the untasted wine. "Balthasar loves the Emperor!" he cried. "Certes, yes, why not? The Margrave was always affectionate, and the Emperor is lovable." A second time Dirk raised the glass, and now drained it. "Here is good matter for plots," he said, elegantly wiping his lips. "Here is occasion for you and me to make our profit. Said ye the devil was a bad master? Listen to this." Theirry moved the candlestick. The gold light dazzled in his eyes. "What can Emperor or Empress be to us?" he asked, a half-bewildered fear darkening his brows. "She has been here," said Dirk. "The Lady Ysabeau." Theirry stared intently. A quick breath stirred his parted lips. His cheeks glowed with excited colour. "She knows," continued Dirk, "that I, Dr. Constantine of Frankfort College, and you, meek secretary to her chamberlain, are the 2 students chased from Basle University." Thierry gave a little sound of pain and drew back in the huge carved chair. "So," said Dirk slowly, "she has it in her power to ruin us, at least in Frankfort." "How can I hold up my head at court again?" exclaimed Thierry bitterly. "There is more in it than that," he answered quietly. "Did she choose, he might have us burnt in the marketplace. Joris of Thuringia died of his illness that night." "Oh!" cried Thierry, blenching. "But she will not choose," said Dirk calmly. "She needs me, us. That threat is but her means of forcing obedience. She came secretly to my lectures. She had heard somewhat, she discovered more." Thierry filled his glass. "She needs us?" he repeated falteringly. "Cannot ye guess in what way?" Thierry drank, set down the half-emptied glass, and looked at the floor with troubled eyes that evaded the other's bright eyes. "How can I tell?" he asked, as if reluctant to speak at all. Dirk repressed a movement of impatience. "Come, you know. Shall I speak plainly?" "Certes, yes," answered Thierry, still with averted face. "There is a man in her way." Thierry looked up now. His eyes showed pale in his flushed face. "Who must die as Joris of Thuringia died?" he asked. "Yes." Thierry moistened his lips. "Am I to help you? Are we not one, inseparable? The reward will be magnificent." Thierry put his hand to a damp brow. "Who is the man?" "Hush!" whispered Dirk, peering through the halo of the candle flame. "It is the Emperor." "Her husband? I will not do it, Dirk." "I do not think ye have a choice," was the cold answer. "Ye gave yourself unto the devil and unto me, and you shall serve us both." "I will not do it," repeated Thierry in a shuddering voice. Dirk's eyes glimmered wrathfully. "Take care how you say that. There are two already. What of the monk? I do not think you can turn back." Thierry showed a desperate face. "Why have ye drawn me into this? Ye are deeper in devil's arts than I." "That is a strange thing to say," answered Dirk, very pale, his lips quivering. "You swore comradeship with me. Together we were to pursue success, fame, power. You knew the means. Ay, you knew by whose aid we were to rise. You shared with me the labours, the disgrace that fell on both of us. Together we worked the spells that slew Joris of Thuringia. Together we stole God, his gold, from the monk. Now, and now when I tell you our chance has come, this is your manner of thanking me. A chance to help a woman in a secret murder." Thierry spoke sullenly. "Ye never thought our way would be the way of saintship. Ye were not so nice that time ye bound Ambrose of Menthon to the tree." "How often must you remind me of that?" cried Thierry fiercely. "I had not done it but for you." "Well, say the same of this. If you be weak, I am strong enough for two." Thierry pulled at the crimson tassels on his slashed sleeves. "It is not that I am afraid," he said, flushing. "Certes, you are afraid," mocked Dirk. "Afraid of God, of justice, maybe of man, but I tell you that these things are not to us." He paused, lifted his eyes and lowered them again. "Our destiny is not of our shaping. We take the weapons laid to our hands and use them as we are bid. Life and death shall both serve us to our appointed end." Thierry came to the other side of the table and gazed fearfully across at him. "Who are you?" he questioned softly. Dirk did not answer. An expression of dread and despair withered all the life in his features. The extraordinary look in his suddenly dimmed eyes sent a chill to Theirry's heart. " Ach !" he cried, stepping back with manifest loathing. Dirk put his hand over his eyes and moaned. " Do you hate me, Theirry? Do you hate me?" " I do not know." He could not explain his own sudden revulsion as he saw the change in Dirk's face. He paced to and fro in a tumult. Dark had closed in upon them, and now blackness lay beyond the window and the half-opened door. Shadows obscured the corners of the long chamber. All the light, the red gleam of the candles, the green glow of the lamp shone over the table and the slight figure of Dirk. As Theirry stopped to gaze at him anew, Dirk suddenly lowered his white hand, and his eyes, blinking above his long fingers, held Theirry in a keen glance. " This will make us more powerful than the Empress or the Emperor," he said. " Leave your thoughts of me and ponder on that." He withdrew his hand and revealed lips as pale as his cheeks. " What does that mean?" cried Theirry. " I am distracted." " We shall go to Rome," replied Dirk. There was a lulling quality of temptation in his tone. " And you shall have your desires." " My desires!" echoed Theirry wildly. " I have trod an unholy path, pursuing the phantom of my desires. Do you still promise me I shall one day grasp it?" " Surely. Money and power and pleasure — these things wait you in Rome when Ysabeau shall have placed the imperial diadem on Balthasar's brow. These things and " it seemed as if Dirk's voice broke — "even Jacobea of Martzburg," he added slowly. " Can one win a saint by means of devilry?" cried Theirry. " She is only a woman," said Dirk wearily. " But since you hesitate and falter, I will absolve you from this league with me. Go your way, serve your saint, renounce your sins, and see what God will give you." " No, I cannot. I will not forego even the hope of what you offer me." His great eyes glittered with excitement, the hot blood darkened his cheek. " And I pledged myself to you and your master. Do not think me cowardly because I paused. Who is the Emperor?" He spoke hoarsely. " Nothing to you or to me. As you say, Joris of Thuringia died." " Now you speak like my comrade at Basle," cried Dirk joyfully. " Now I see again the spirit that roused me to swear friendship with you the night we first met. Now I — ah, Theirry, we will be very faithful to one another, will we not?" " I have no choice." " Swear it," cried Dirk. " I swear it," said Theirry. Dirk clasped and unclasped his hands on the table, murmuring, " I have won him back, won him back." Theirry spoke without turning his head. " What do you mean to do next?" " I shall see the Empress again," answered Dirk. " At present, be very secret, that is all. There is no need to speak of it. Your absence may be noticed at the palace," he said softly. " You must return. How you can help me I will let you know." " Where have you been to day?" asked Theirry. " Did you see the court returning from the tourney?" The candle flames, flaring with the movement, cast a rich glow over Dirk's pallid face. " No. Why do you ask?" he said. " I know not." Theirry's crimson doublet sparkled in its silk threads as his breast rose with the irregular breaths. He walked heavily to the door, gathering up his black mantle over his arm. " When may I come again?" he asked. " When you will," answered Dirk. He entered the passage and held up the heavy candlestick, so that a great circle of light was cast on the darkness. "Ye are pledged to me whether ye come or no, are ye not?" "Certes, I do think so," said Theirry. He hesitated. Theirry went down the passage. He found the door and unlatched it. A soft but powerful breath of air fluttered the candle flames almost onto Dirk's face. He turned back into the room and shut himself in, leaving darkness behind him. Theirry stepped into the street and drew the latch. A few stars were out, but the night was cloudy. He leant against the side of the house. He felt excited, confused, impatient. Dirk's abrupt dismissal rankled. He was half ashamed of the power exercised over him by his frail comrade, half bewildered by the allurement of the reward that promised to be so near now. Rome, splendour, power, Jacobea of Martzburg, and only one stranger between him and this consummation. He wondered why he had ever hesitated, ever been horrified. His anticipations became so brilliant that they mounted like winged spirits to the clouds, catching him up with them. He could scarcely breathe in the close atmosphere of excitement. 1,000 questions to which he might have demanded answer of Dirk occurred to him, and stung with impatience his elated heart. On a quick impulse he turned to the door and tried the handle. To his surprise, he found it bolted from within. He wondered both at Dirk's caution and his softness of tread, for he had heard no sound. It was not yet late, but he did not desire to attract attention by knocking. Full of his resolution to speak further with Dirk, he passed round the house and entered the garden with the object of gaining admittance by the low windows of the room where they had been conversing. But the light had gone from the chamber, and the windows were closed. With an exclamation of impatience, Theirry stepped back among the rose bushes and looked up. Dirk's bedchamber was also in darkness. Black and silent the witch's dwelling showed against the still but stormy sky. Theirry felt a chill run to his heart. Where had the youth gone so instantly, so silently? Who had noiselessly bolted door and windows? Then suddenly a light flashed across his vision. It appeared in the window of a room built out from the house at the side, a room that Theirry had always imagined was used as a store-place for Nathalie's drugs and herbs. He did not remember that he had ever entered it or ever seen a light there before. His curiosity was stirred. Dirk had spoken of weariness. Perhaps this was the witch herself. He waited for the light to disappear, but it continued to glow, like a steady star across the darkness of the rose garden. The heavy scent of the half-seen blooms filled the gusty wind that began to arise. Great fragments of cloud sped above the dark roofline of the house. Theirry crept nearer the light. It had crossed his mind many times that Dirk and Nathalie held secrets they kept from him, and the doubt had often set him raging inwardly. As well he knew the witch despised him as a useless novice in the black arts. Old suspicions returned to him as, advancing warily, he drew near the light and crouched against the wall of the house. A light curtain was pulled across the window, but carelessly, and drawn slightly awry to avoid the light set in the window-seat. Theirry, holding his breath, looked in. He saw an oval room hung with Syrian tapestries of scarlet and yellow, and paved with black and white marble. The air was thick with the blue vapour of some perfume burning in a copper brazier, and lit by lamps suspended from the wall, their light glowing from behind screens of a pure pink silk. The end of the apartment was hidden by a violet velvet curtain embroidered with grapes and swans. Near this a low couch covered with scarlet draperies and purple cushions was placed, and close to this a table set with a white cloth bearing moons and stars worked in blue. Theirry almost betrayed himself by a cry of surprise. A long, slender woman's hand and arm slipped between the folds of the velvet. A delicate foot appeared. The curtain trembled. The aperture widened, and the figure of a girl was revealed in dusky shadow. She was tall, and wore a long robe of yellow sendal that she held up over her bosom with her left hand. She might have just come forth from the bath, for her shoulders, arms, and feet were bare, and the lines of her limbs noticeable through the thin silk. Her head and face were wrapped in a silver gauze. She stood quite still, half withdrawn behind the curtain, only the finely shaped white arm that held it back fully revealed. Her appearance impressed Theirry with unnameable dread and terror. He remained rigid at the window, gazing at her, not able, if he would, to fly. Through the veil that concealed her face he could see restless dark eyes and the line of dark hair. He thought that she must see him, that she looked at him even as he looked at her, but he could not stir. Slowly she came forward into the room. Her feet were noiseless on the stone floor, but as she moved Theirry heard a curious dragging sound he could not explain. She was drawing nearer the window. As she approached she half turned, and Theirry saw flat, green and dull wings of wrinkled skin folded on her back. The tips of them touched the floor. These had made the dragging sound he had heard. With a tortured cry wrung from him, he flung up his hands to shut out the dreadful thing. She heard him, stopped, and gave a shriek of dread and anguish. The lights were instantly extinguished. The room was in absolute darkness. Theirry turned and rushed across the garden. He thought the rose bushes catching on his garments were hands seeking to detain him. He thought that he heard a window open and a flapping of wings in the air above him. He cried out to the God on whom he had turned his back, "Christus, have mercy!" And so he stumbled to the gate and out into the quiet street of Frankfurt. End of section 14. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 15 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 15, Melchoir of Brabant. The last chant of the monks died away. The Sabbath service was ended, and the court rose from its place in the emperor's chapel, but Jacobea remained on her knees and tried to pray. The empress, very fair and childishly sweet, drooping under the weight of her jeweled garments, even with 3 pages to lift her train, raised her brows to see her lady remaining, and gave her a little smile as she passed. The emperor, dark, reserved, devout, and plainly habited, followed, with his eyes still on his breviary. He was leaning on the arm of Balthasar of Courtrai. The sun, falling slantwise through the high-coloured windows, made the fair locks and golden clothes of the Margrave one glitter in a dazzling brightness. Jacobea could not bring her thoughts to dwell on holy things. Her hands were clasped on her prie-dieu. Her open book was before her, but her eyes wandered from the altar to the crowd passing down the aisle. Among the faces that went by she could not but mark the beautiful countenance of Theirry, the secretary to the queen's chamberlain. She noticed him, as she always did, for his obvious calm handsomeness. Today she noticed further that he looked grieved, distraught, and pale. Wondering at this, she observed him so intently that his long hazel eyes glanced aside and met hers in an intense gaze, grave and sad. She thought there was a question or an appeal, some meaning in his look, and she turned her slender neck and stared after him, so that two ladies following smiled at each other. Theirry kept his eyes fixed on her until he left the chapel, and a slow color crept into his cheek. When the last courtier had glittered away out of the low arched door, Jacobea bent her head and rested her cheek against the top of the high prie-dieu. Could her prayers have been shaped into words, they would have been such as these: O Mary, Empress of Heaven, O saints and angels, defend me from the devil and my own wicked heart. Shelter me in my weakness and arm me to victory. Incense still lingered in the air. It stole pleasantly to her nostrils. She raised her eyes timidly to the red light on the altar, then rose from her knees, clasping her breviary to her bosom, and turning, she saw Theirry standing inside the door watching her. She knew that he was waiting to speak to her, and she knew not why, it gave her a sense of comfort and pleasure. Slowly she came down the aisle towards him, and as she approached, smiled. He took a step into the church. There was no answering smile on his face. "Teach me to pray, I beseech you," he said ardently. "Let me kneel beside you." "I? Alas," she answered, "you do not know me. I know that if any one could lead a soul upwards, it would be you." "Scarcely can I pray for myself," she answered. "I am weak, unhappy, and alone. Sir, whatever your trouble, you must not come to me for aid." His dark eyes flashed softly. "You unhappy? I have ever thought of you as gay and careless as the roses." She gazed on him wistfully. "Once I was. That day I saw you first, do you remember, sir? I often recall it, because it seemed that after that I changed." She shuddered, and her grey eyes grew wet and mournful. "It was your friend." Theirry's face hardened. "My friend?" "The young scholar," she said quickly and fearfully. He is in Frankfort now." "You have seen him?" She bowed her head. "What does he want with me? He will not let me be in peace. He pursues me with horrible thoughts. He hates me. He will undo my soul." "When did you meet him?" asked Theirry in a low, fearful voice. Jacobea told him of the encounter in the forest. He marked that it was the day of the great tourney, the day when he had last seen Dirk. He remembered certain matters he had uttered concerning Jacobea. "If he has been tampering with you," he cried wrathfully, "if he dares—" "Then you know somewhat of him?" she interrupted in a half horror. "Ay, to my shame I do," he answered. "I know him for what he is. If you value your peace, your soul, do not heed him." She drew away. "But you are you in league with him?" Theirry groaned and set his teeth. "He holds me in a mesh of temptation. He lures me into great wickedness." Jacobea moved still further back, shrinking from him into the gloom of the chapel. "Oh," she said, who is he?" Theirry lowered his eyes and frowned. "You must not ask me." He fingered the base of the pilaster against the door. "But he troubles me," she answered intensely. "The thought of him is like some one clinging to my garments to drag me down." Theirry lifted his head sharply to gaze at her tall, slender figure, but lifted his eyes no higher than her clasped hands that lay over the breviary below her heart. "How can he, or such as he, disturb you? What temptation can you be beguiled with?" and as he saw the delicate fingers tremble on the ivory cover, his soul was hot and sore against Dirk. "I will not speak of what might beguile me," said Jacobea in a low voice. "I dare not speak of it. Let it go. It is a great sin." "There is sin for me also," murmured Theirry, "but the prize seems almost worth it." "Worth it, you say?" she whispered. "Worth it?" Her tone made him wince. He could fancy Dirk at her shoulder prompting her, and he lifted his head and answered strongly: "You cannot care to know, and I dare not tell, what has put me in the power of this young scholar, nor what are the temptations with which he enmeshes me. But this you must hear." His hand was outspread on his bosom, pressing on his heart. His hazel eyes were dilated and intense. "This, I should be his, utterly, wholly his, one with him in evil, if it were not for you and the thought of you." "You are the chatelaine of Martzburg," continued Theirry in a less steady voice, "and you do not know me. It is not fit that you should, but twice you have been gentle with me, and if you could so care, for your sake I would shake the clinging devils off. I would live good and humble, and scorn the tempting youth." "What must I do to help you?" answered Jacobea. "Be what you are, that is all. Be noble, pure. Ah, sweet! That, seeing you, I can still believe in heaven and strive for it." She looked at him earnestly. "Why, you are the only one to care that I should be noble and sweet, and it would make a difference to you?" Her questioning voice fell wistfully. "Ah, sir, were you to hear a wicked thing of me and know it true, did I become a vile, a hideous creature, would it make a difference?" "It would, for me, make the difference between hell and paradise." She flushed and trembled. "Certes, you have heartened me. Nay, you must not set me in a shrine, but, oh sir, honor me and I will be worthy of it." She raised an appealing face. "On my knees," answered Theirry earnestly. "I will do you worship. I am no knight to wear your colours boldly, but you shall win a fairer triumph than ever graced the jousts, for I will come back to God through you, and live my days a repentant man, because of you." "Nay, each through the other," said Jacobea. "I think I too had Jesu! fallen, if someone had not cared." He paled with pain. "What did he, that youth, tempt you with?" "No matter," she said faintly. "It is over now. I will be equal to your thoughts of me, sir. I have no knight, nor have wished for one, but I will often think of you who have encouraged me in this my loneliness." "Please God," he said, "we both are free of devilry. Will you make that a pact with me, that I may think of you as far above it all as is the moon above the mire? Will you give me leave to think you always as innocent as I would have my saint?" "Your worship, sir, shall make me so," she answered gravely. "Think no ill of me, and I will do no ill." He went on his knee and kissed the hem of her soft gown. "You have saved me," he whispered, "from everlasting doom." As he rose, Jacobea held out her hand and touched him gently on the sleeve. "God be thanked," she said. He bent his head and left her. She drew from her bosom the crucifix that had been her companion in the forest, and kissed it reverently, her heart more at ease than since the day when she first met Dirk Renswoude. Returning to the great hall of the palace with quick resolve to return to Martzburg, or to send for Sybilla forming in her mind, she encountered the Empress walking up and down the long chamber discontentedly. Isabeau, who affected a fondness for Jacobea, smiled on her indolently, but Jacobea, always a little overawed by her great loveliness, and, in her soul, disliking her, would have passed on. The Empress raised her hand. "Nay, stay and talk to your poor deserted lady," she said in her babyish voice. "The Emperor is in his chamber writing Latin prayers on a day like this." She kissed her hand to the sunshine and the flowers seen through the window. "My dames are all abroad with their gallants, and I hazard what I have been doing." She held her left hand behind her and laughed in Jacobea's face. Seen thus in her over-gorgeous clothes, her childlike appearance and beauty giving her an air of fresh innocence, she was not unlike the little image of the Virgin often set above her altars. "Guess!" she cried again. Then, without waiting for an answer, "Catching butterflies in the garden." She showed her hand now, and held delicately before Jacobea's eyes a white net drawn tightly together full of vari-colored butterflies. "What is the use of them, poor souls?" asked Jacobea. The Empress looked at her prisoners. "Their wings are very lovely," she said greedily. "If I pulled them off, would they last? Sewn on silk, how they would shimmer!" "Nay, they would fade," answered Jacobea hastily. "Ye have tried it?" demanded the Empress. "Nay, I could not be so cruel. I love such little gay creatures." Reflection darkened Isabeau's gorgeous eyes. "Well, I will take the wings off and see if they lose their brightness." She surveyed the fluttering victims. "Some are purple, a rare shade." Jacobea's smooth brow gathered in a frown of distress. "They are alive," she said, "and it is agreeable to them to live. Will you not let them free?" Isabeau laughed, not at all babyish now. "You need not watch me, dame." "Your Grace does not consider how gentle and helpless they are. Indeed," Jacobea flushed in her eagerness, "they have faces and little velvet jackets on their bodies." Isabeau frowned and turned away. "It amuses you to thwart my pleasures," she answered. She suddenly flung the net at Jacobea. "Take them and be gone." The chatelaine of Martzburg, knowing something of the Empress, was surprised at this sudden yielding. Looking round, however, she learned the cause of it. The Margrave of East Flanders had entered the hall. She caught up the rescued butterflies and left the chamber, while the Empress sank into the window seat among the crimson cushions patterned with sprawling lions, pulled a white rose out of her belt, and set her teeth in the stem of it. "Where is Melchoir?" asked the Margrave, coming towards her. His immense size, augmented by his full, rich clothes, gave him the air of a golden giant. "Writing Latin prayers?" she mocked. "Were you Emperor of the West, Lord Balthasar, would you do that?" He frowned. "I am not such a holy man as Melchoir." Isabeau laughed. "Were you my husband, would you do that?" His fresh, fair face flushed rose colour. "This is among the things I may not even fancy." She looked out of the window. Her dress was low and loosened about the shoulders, by cause of the heat, she said, but she loved to make a pageant of her beauty. Purposely she was silent, hoping Balthasar would speak, but he stood, without a word, leaning against the tapestry. "Oh God!" she said at last, without turning her head, "I loathe Frankfort." His eyes glittered, but he made no answer. "Were I a man I would not be so tame." Now he spoke. Princess, you know that I am sick for Rome, but what may we do when the Emperor makes delays? Melchoir should be a monk, his wife returned bitterly, since a German township serves him when he might rule half the world. Now she gave Balthasar her lovely face and fixed on him her violet eyes. We of the East do not understand this diffidence. My father was an Aegean groom who took the throne by strangling the life out of his master. He ruled strongly in Ravenna. I was born in the purple, nursed in the gold. I do not fathom your northern tardiness. The Emperor will go to Rome, said the Margrave in a troubled voice. He will cross the Alps this year, I think. Her white lids drooped. You love Melchoir, therefore you bear with him. He lifted his head. You too must bear with him, since he is your lord, princess, he answered. How stern you are, Margrave! If I but turn a breath against Melchoir, and sometimes you wrong me, forgetting that I also am your friend. Her eyes were quick to flash over him, to mark how stiffly and awkwardly he stood and could not look at her. My duty to the Emperor, she said softly, and my love cannot blind me to his weakness now. Come, Lord Balthasar, to you also it is weakness, even your loyalty must admit we lose the time. The Pope says, come. The King of the Lombards will acknowledge my lord his suzerain, and here we stay in Frankfurt, waiting for the winter to cut off the Alps. Certes, he is wrong, frowned the Margrave. Wrong. If I were he, I would be emperor in good sooth, and all the world should know that I ruled in Rome. She drew a long breath. Strange that we, his friend and his wife, cannot persuade him. The nobles are on our side also, save Hugh of Rousselary, who is ever at his ear, answered Balthasar. He brings him to stay in Germany. The Lord of Rousselary, echoed the Empress. His daughter was your wife? I never saw her, he interrupted quickly, and she died. Her father seems, therefore, to hate me. And me also, I think, though why I do not know, she smiled. His daughter's dead. Dead? Oh, we are very sure that she is dead. Certes, she was as good as another, the Margrave spoke gloomily. Now I must wed again. The Empress stared at him. I did not think you considered that. I must. I am the Margrave now. Isabeau turned her head and fixed her eyes on the palace garden. There is no lady worthy of your rank, and at the same time free, she said. You have an heiress in your train, princess, Jacobea of Martzburg. I have thought of her. Can you think of her? She is near as tall as you, Margrave, and not fair. Oh, a gentle fool enough, but, she looked over her shoulder. Am I not your lady? Ay, and ever will be, he answered, lifting his bright blue eyes. I wear your favour, I do battle for you. In the jousts you are my queen of love. I make my prayers in your name, and am your servant, princess. Well, you need not a wife. She bit her lips to keep them still. Certes, answered Balthasar wonderingly, a knight must have a wife besides a lady, since his lady is oft times the spouse of another, and his highest thought is to touch her gown. But a wife is to keep his castle and do his service. The Empress twisted her fingers in and out her girdle. I had rather, she cried passionately, be wife than lady. Ye are both, he answered flushing, the Emperor's wife and my lady. She gave him a curious glance. Sometimes I think you are a fool, yet maybe it is only that I am not used to the north. How you would show in Byzantium, my cold Margrave." And she leant across the gold and red cushions towards him. "Certes, you shall have your long straight maiden. I think her heart is as chill as yours." He moved away from her. "Ye shall not mock me, princess," he said fiercely. "My heart is hot enough. Let me be." She laughed at him. "Are you afraid of me? Why do you move away? Come back, and I will recount you the praises of Jacobea of Martzburg." He gave her a sullen look. "No more of her." "And yet your heart is hot enough." "Not with the thought of her, God knows." But the Empress pressed her hands together and slowly rose, looking past Balthasar at the door. "Melchoir, we speak of you," she said. The Margrave turned. The Emperor, velvet shod, was softly entering. He glanced gravely at his wife and smilingly at Balthasar. "We speak of you," repeated Ysabeau, dark-eyed and flushed. "Of you and Rome." Melchoir of Brabant, third of his name, austere, reserved, proud and cold, looked more like a knight of the church than king of Germany and emperor of the West. He was plainly habited, his dark hair cut close, his handsome, slightly haughty face composed and stern. Too earnest was he to be showily attractive, yet many men adored him, among them Balthasar of Courtrai, for in himself the emperor was both brave and lovable. "Cannot you have done with Rome?" he asked sadly, while his large intelligent eyes rested affectionately on the Margrave. "Is Frankfort grown so distasteful?" "Certes, no, Lord Melchoir. It is the chance, the chance." The Emperor sank in a weary manner on to a seat. "Hugh of Rooselaare and I have spoken together, and we have agreed, Balthasar, not to go to Rome." The Empress stiffened and dropped her lids. The Margrave turned swiftly to face his master, and all the colour was dashed out of his fresh face. Melchoir smiled gently. "My friend, ye are an adventurer and think of the glory to be gained, but I must think of my people who need me here. The land is not fit to leave. It will need many men to hold Rome. We must drain the land of knights, wring money from the poor, tax the churches, leave Germany defenceless, a prey to the Franks, and this for the empty title of emperor." Balthasar's breast heaved. "Is this your decision?" The Emperor answered gravely, "I do not think it God his wish that I should go to Rome." The Margrave bent his head and was silent, but Ysabeau flung her clear voice into the pause. "In Constantinople a man such as you would not long fill a throne. Ere now you had been a blinded monk, and I free to choose another husband." The Emperor rose from his seat. "The woman raves," he said to the pale Margrave. "Begone, Balthasar." The German left them. When his heavy footfall had died into silence, Melchoir looked at his wife, and his eyes flashed. "God forgive my father," he said bitterly, "for tying me to this Eastern she-cat." "I was meant for a man's mate," she cried fiercely, "for a Caesar's wife. I would they had flung me to a footboy sooner than given me to thee, thou trembling woman's soul." "Thou hast repaid the injury," answered the Emperor sternly, "by the great unhappiness I have in thee. My life is not sweet with thee, nor easy. I would thou hadst less beauty and more gentleness." "I am gentle enough when I choose," she mocked. "Balthasar and the court think me a loving wife." "It is most true, none save I know you for the thing you are, heartless, cruel, fierce and hard." She came swiftly across the floor to him. "Have you any courage? Any blood in you? Will you go to Rome?" "To please your wanton ambition I will do nothing, nor will I for any reason go to Rome." Isabeau quivered like an infuriated animal. "I will talk no more of it," said Melchoir coldly and wearily. "Too often do we waste ourselves in such words as these." "I am ashamed to call you lord," she said hoarsely, "humbled before every woman in the kingdom who sees her husband brave at least, while I know you coward. Hark to me, my wife, I am your master and the master of this land. I will not be insulted, nay, nor flouted by your stinging tongue. Hold me in what contempt ye will, you shall not voice it, by Saint George, no! Not if I have to take the whip to hold you dumb." "Ho! A Christian knight," she jeered. "I loathe your church as I loathe you. I am not Isabeau, but still Marozia Porphyrogenita." "Do not remind me thy father was a stableman and a murderer," said Melchoir, "nor that I caused thee to change a name the woman of thy line had made accursed. Would I could send thee back to Ravenna, for thou hast brought me naught but bitterness." "Be careful," breathed Isabeau, "be careful." "Stand out of my way," he commanded. For answer, she loosened the heavy girdle round her waist. He saw her purpose and caught her hands. "You shall not strike me." The links of gold hung from her helpless fingers while she gazed at him with brilliant eyes. "Would you have struck me?" "Yea, across your mouth," she answered. "Now, were you a man, you would kill me." He took the belt from her arm, releasing her. "That you should trouble me," he said wearily. At this she stood aside to let him pass. He turned to the door, and as he lifted the tapestry flung down her belt. The Empress crept along the floor, snatched it up and stood still, panting. Before the passion had left her face, the hangings were stirred again. One of her chamberlains. "Princess, there is a young doctor below, desires to see you. Constantine, his name, of Frankfort College." "Oh," said Isabeau, a guilty colour touched her whitened cheek. "I know nothing of him," she added quickly. "Pardon, Princess, he says 'tis to decipher an old writing you have sent to him. His words are, 'When you see him you will remember.'" The blood burnt more brightly still under the exquisite skin. "Bring him here," she said. But even as the chamberlain moved aside, the slender figure of Dirk appeared in the doorway. He looked at her, smiling calmly, his scholar's cap in his hand. "Do you remember me?" he asked. The Empress moved her head in assent. End of section 15. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 16 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 16, The Quarrel. Dirk Renswoude laid down the pen and pushed aside the parchment, and lifted heavy eyes with a sigh of weariness. It was midday, and very hot. The witches' red roses were beginning to shed their petals and disclose their yellow hearts, and the leaves of the great trees that shaded the house were curling and yellowing in the fierce sun. From his place at the table Dirk could mark these signs of autumn without, yet, by the look in his eyes, it seemed that he saw neither trees nor flowers, but only some image evoked by his thoughts. Presently he picked up the quill, bit the end of it, frowned, and laid it down. Then he started and looked round with some eagerness, for a light sound broke the sleepy stillness. The door opened, and before his expectant gaze Theirry appeared. Dirk flushed and smiled. "Well met," he said. "I have much to say to you." "And I am come because I also have much to say." "Speak then." He returned to his seat, took his face between his two delicate hands, and rested his elbows on the table. "I was writing my lecture for tonight. Certes, I shall be glad of a diversion." "There is no need to make an ado," Theirry began, obviously with an effort. "I am not going on with you." "You are not going on?" repeated Dirk. "Well, your reasons?" "May God forgive me what I have done," cried Theirry in great agitation, "but I will sin no more. I have resolved it, and ye cannot tempt me." "And all you swore to me?" demanded Dirk. His eyes narrowed, but he remained composed. "No man is bound to bargains with the devil. I have been weak and wicked, but I mingle no more in your fiendish counsels." "This is for Jacobea of Martzburg's sake." "It is for her sake, because of her that I am here now to tell you I have done with it, done with you." Dirk dropped his hands on to the table. "Theirry! Theirry!" he cried wildly and sorrowfully. "I have measured the temptation," said Theirry. "I have thought of the gain, the loss. I have put it aside, with God's help and hers. I will not aid you in the way you asked me, nor will I see it done." "And ye call that virtue?" cried Dirk. "Poor fool, all it amounts to is that you, alas, love the chatelaine." "Nay," he answered hotly, "it is that, having seen her, I would not be vile. You meditate a dastard thing. The Emperor is a noble knight." "Ambrose of Menthon was a holy monk," retorted Dirk. "Who choked the pious words in his throat? Joris of Thuringia was an innocent youth. Who sent him to a hideous death?" "I," cried Theirry fiercely, "but always with you to goad me on. Before the devil sent you across my way I had never touched sin save in dim thoughts. But you, with talk of friendship, lured me from an honest man's company to poison me with forbidden knowledge, to tempt me into hideous blasphemies, and I will have no more of it." "Yet you vowed comradeship with me," said Dirk. "Is your loyalty of such quality?" Theirry sprang violently from his chair and paced heavily up and down the room. "You blinded me. I knew not what I did, but now I know. When I heard her speak, and heard that you had dared to try to trap her to destruction—" Dirk interrupted with a low laugh. "So she told you that? But I warrant that she was dumb about the nature of her temptation." "That is no matter," answered Theirry. "Now she is free of you, as I shall be." "As you vowed to her you would be," added Dirk. "Well, go your way. I thought you loved me a little. But the first woman's face—" Theirry stood still to front him. "I cannot love that which I fear." Dirk went swiftly very pale. "Do you fear me, Theirry?" he asked wistfully. "Ay, ye know too much of Satan's lore, more than you ever taught me." He shuddered uncontrollably. "There are things in this very house—" "What do you mean? What do you mean?" Dirk rose in his place. "Who is the woman?" whispered Theirry fearfully. "There is a woman here." "In this house there are none save Nathalie and me," answered Dirk on the defensive, his eyes dark and glowing. "There you lie to me. The last time I was here I turned back swiftly on leaving, but found the door bolted, the lights out, all save one, in the little chamber next to this. I watched at the window and saw a gorgeous room and a woman, a winged woman." "You dream," answered Dirk in a low voice. "Do you think I have enough power to raise such shapes?" "I think 'twas some love of yours from hell," whence you came. My love is not in hell, but on the earth, answered Dirk quietly. Yet shall we go together into the pit. As for the woman, it was a dream. There is no gorgeous chamber there. He crossed the room and flung open a little door in the wall. See, old Natalie's closet full of herbs and charms. Theirry peered into an ill-lit apartment filled with shelves containing jars and bottles. The enchantment that could bring the woman could change the room, he muttered, unconvinced. Dirk gave a slow, strange look. Was she beautiful? Ay, but more beautiful than Jacobea of Martzburg? Theirry laughed. I cannot compare Satan's handmaiden with a lily from paradise. Dirk closed the closet door. Theirry, he said falteringly, do not leave me. You are the only thing in all the universe can move me to joy or pain. I love you utterly. Out on such affection that would steal my soul. You do not know how dear I hold you, insisted Dirk in a trembling voice. Come back to me, and I will let your lady be. She can scorn ye, defy ye, as I do now. Will she? Certes, I wonder. Will she? He cried. You will have none of me, you say. You reject me. But for how long? Forever, answered Theirry hoarsely. Or until Jacobea of Martzburg falls? Theirry swung round. That leaves it still forever. Maybe. However, only for a few poor weeks. Your lily is very fragile, Theirry, so look to see it broken in the mud. If you harm her, cried Theirry fiercely, if you blast her with your hellish spells. Nay, I will not. Of herself she shall come to ruin. When that is, I will return to you. So, farewell forever. Wait, Dirk called to him. What of this that you know of me? Theirry paused. So much I owe you that I should be silent. Since, if you speak, you bring to light your own history, smiled Dirk. But about the Emperor? God helping me, I will prevent that. How will you prevent it? Dirk asked quietly. Would you betray me as a first offering to your outraged God? Theirry pressed his hand to his brow in a bewildered, troubled manner. No, not that. But I will take occasion to warn him, to warn some one of the Empress. Dirk hunched his shoulders scornfully. Ah, begone! Ye are a foolish creature. Go and put them on their guard. Theirry flushed. Ay, I will, he answered hotly. I know one honest man about the court, Hugh of Rooselaare. A quick change came over Dirk's face. The Lord of Rooselaare, he said. I should remember him, certes. His daughter was Balthasar's wife, Ursula. Warn whom you will, say what you will, save if ye can, Melchoir of Brabant. Begone. See, I seek not to detain you. One day you shall come back to me, when yon soft saint fails, and I shall be waiting for you. Till then, farewell. Their eyes met. Theirry's were the first to falter. He muttered something like a malediction on himself, lifted the latch and strode away. Dirk had not been long alone when the door was pushed open and Natalie crept in. The witch came to the table, took up the youth's passive hand and fawned over it. Let him go, she said in an insinuating voice. He is a fool. Why, I have put no strain on him to stay, Dirk smiled faintly, but he will return. Nay, pleaded Natalie, forget him. Forget him, repeated Dirk mournfully, but I love him. Natalie stroked the still, slim fingers anxiously. "This affection will be your ruin," she moaned. Dirk gazed past her at the autumn sky and the overblown red roses. "Well, if it be so," he said pantingly, "it will be his ruin also. He must go with me when I leave the world. The world! After all, Nathalie," he turned his strange gaze on the witch, "it does not matter if she hold him here so long as he is mine through eternity." His lips flushed and quivered, the long lashes drooped over his eyes, then suddenly he smiled. "Nathalie, he has good intentions. He hopes to save the Emperor." The witch blinked up at him. "But is it too late?" "Certes, I conveyed the potion to Ysabeau this morning," and Dirk's smile deepened. End of section 16. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 17 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 17. The Murder. "Balthasar," said the Emperor in pity of his friend's sullen face, "I will send ye to Rome to make treaty with the Pope, since it goes so heavily with you to stay in Frankfort." The Margrave bit the ends of his yellow hair and made no answer. The Empress half lay along the seat against the wall. On low stools near her sat her maidens, sewing, 3 of them, embroidering between them a strip of scarlet silk. It was the dining hall, the table laid already with rudely magnificent covers. "Nay, be pleasant with me," smiled the Emperor. He laid his arm affectionately round the Margrave's huge shoulders. "Certes, since I took this resolution not to go to Rome, I have naught but sour looks from all save Hugh." Balthasar's good-humoured face cleared. "Ye are wrong, my prince, but God wot, I am not angered. We can manage without Rome." He heroically stifled his sigh. "And who knows that ye may not change yet?" he added cheerfully. Ysabeau looked at them as they paced up and down, their arms about each other. Her husband seemed not to know of her presence, but the Margrave was hotly conscious of her eyes upon him, and though he would not turn his upon her, nevertheless she marked it, and in a half-smiling way came and leant on the table that divided them. "Surely we are late tonight," said the Emperor. "Yea," answered Balthasar, "I do not love to wait." He stopped to pour himself a tankard of amber wine, and drank it at a draught. Ysabeau watched him. "Will not my lord also drink?" she asked. The fingers of her right hand were hidden in a cluster of red roses. With her left hand she raised a chased flagon in which the sunlight burnt and sparkled. "As you please, princess," answered Melchoir, and gazed towards the light indifferently. "Ye might have poured for me," murmured the Margrave in a half voice. Her hand came from the roses and touched a horn glass bound with silver. It lingered there a moment, then rose to her bosom. Balthasar, absorbing her face, did not notice the gesture. "Another time," she answered, "I will serve you, Balthasar of Courtrai." She filled the glass until wine bubbled at the brim. "Give it to my lord," she said. Balthasar laughed uneasily. Their fingers touched upon the glass, and a few drops were spilt. "Take care," cried the Empress. Melchoir turned and took the goblet. "Why did you say, 'take care'?" he asked. "Between us we upset the wine," said Ysabeau. Melchoir drank. "It has an ugly taste," he said. She laughed. "Is it the cupbearer, perchance?" The Emperor drank again, then set it down. "I say it is strange. Taste it, Balthasar." In an instant the Empress intervened. "Nay," She caught up the glass with a movement swifter than the Margrave's. "Since I poured, the fault, if fault there be, is mine." "Give it to me," cried Balthasar. But she made a quick motion aside, the glass slipped from her fingers, and the wine was lost on the floor. As Balthasar stooped to pick up the goblet, the Emperor smiled. "I warn you of that flagon, Margrave." The pages and varlets entered with the meats and set them on the table. They who sat at the Emperor's board came to take their places. Theirry followed his master and fixed quick eyes on the Emperor. He knew that Melchoir had been abroad all day at the hunt, and could not have long returned. Hardly could their designs upon him be put in practice tonight. After the supper he meant to speak to Hugh of Rooselaare, this as an earnest of his final severance with Dirk. As the beautiful shining crowd settled to their seats, the young secretary, whose place was behind his master's chair, took occasion to note carefully the lord who was to receive his warning. Theirry marked the Empress, sitting languorously and stripping a red rose of its petals. Melchoir, austere, composed, as always. Balthasar, gay and noisy. Then he turned his gaze on Hugh of Rooselaare. That noble sat close to the Emperor. Theirry had not, so far, studied his personal appearance, though acquainted with his reputation. There was something in the turn of his features, the prominent chin, dark, clear eyes, pale complexion, and resolute set of the mouth that gradually teased Theirry as he gazed. The whole expression reminded him of another face, seen under different circumstances, whose he could not determine. Suddenly the lord of Rooselaare, becoming aware of this scrutiny, turned his singularly intent eyes in the direction of the young scholar. At once Theirry had it. He placed the likeness. In this manner had Dirk Renswoude often looked at him. The resemblance was unmistakable, if elusive. This man's face was, of necessity, sterner, darker, older, and more set. He was of larger make, moreover, than Dirk could ever be. His nose was heavier, his jaw more square, yet the likeness, once noticed, could not be again overlooked. It strangely discomposed Theirry. He felt he could not take his warning to one who had Dirk's trick of the intense gaze and inscrutable set of the lips. He considered if there were not someone else. Let him go straight away, he thought, to the Emperor himself. His reflections were interrupted by a little movement near the table, a pause in the converse. All eyes were turned to Melchoir of Brabant. He leant back in his seat and stared before him as if he saw a sight of horror at the other end of the table. He was quite pale, his mouth open, his lips strained and purplish. The Empress sprang up from beside him and caught his arm. "Melchoir!" she shrieked. "Jesu, he does not hear me." The Emperor moved faintly, like one struggling hopelessly under water. "Melchoir!" The Margrave pushed back his chair and seized his friend's cold hand. "Do you not hear us? Will you not speak?" "Balthasar!" The Emperor's voice came as if from depths of distance. "I am bewitched." Ysabeau shrieked and beat her hands together. Melchoir sank forward, while his face glistened with drops of agony. He gave a low crying sound and fell across the table. With an instantaneous movement of fright and horror, the company rose from their seats and pressed towards the Emperor. But the Margrave shouted at them. "Stand back! Would you stifle him? He is not dead, nor, God be thanked, dying." He lifted up the unconscious man and gazed eagerly into his face. As he did so, his own blanched, despite his brave words. Melchoir's eyes and cheeks had fallen hollow, a ghastly hue overspread his features, his jaw dropped, and his lips were cracked as if his breath burnt the blood. " We must take him hence," said Hugh of Rooselaare with authority. " Help me, Margrave." He forced his way to Balthasar's side. The Empress had fallen to her husband's feet, a gleam of white and silver against the dark trappings of the throne. " What shall I do?" she moaned. " What shall I do?" The Lord of Rooselaare glanced at her fiercely. " Cease to whine and bring hither a physician and a priest," he commanded. Ysabeau crouched away from him, and her purple eyes blazed. The Margrave and Hugh lifted the Emperor between them; there was a swaying confusion as chair and seats were pulled out, lights swung higher, and a passage forced through the bewildering crowd for the two nobles and their burden. Some flung open the door of the winding stairway that ascended to the Emperor's bedchamber, and slowly, with difficulty, Melchoir of Brabant was borne up the narrow steps. Ysabeau rose to her feet and watched it. She considered a moment, then ran across the room and followed swiftly after the cumbrous procession. It was now a quarter of an hour since the Emperor had fainted, and the hall was left empty. Only Theirry remained, staring about him with sick eyes. He crossed to the Emperor's seat, where the gorgeous cushions were thrown to right and left. In Ysabeau's place lay a single red rose, half stripped of its leaves, a great cluster of red roses on the floor beside it. This was confirmation; he did not think there was any other place in Frankfort where grew such blooms. So he was too late. Dirk might well defy him, knowing that he would be too late. His resolution was very quickly taken; he would be utterly silent; not by a word or a look would he betray what he knew, since it would be useless. What could save the Emperor now? It was one thing to give warning of evil projected, another to reveal evil performed. Besides, he told himself, the Empress and her faction would be at once in power, Dirk a high favourite. He backed fearfully from the red roses, glowing sombrely by the empty throne, and reflected eagerly on how this affected him and Jacobea of Martzburg. To the man dying miserably above he gave no thought at all; the woman who waited impatiently for her husband's death to put his friend in his place he did not consider. Nor did the fate of the kingship trouble him; he pictured Dirk as triumphant, potent, the close ally of the wicked Empress, and he shivered for his own treasured soul that he had just snatched from perdition. He knew he could not fight nor face Dirk triumphant, armed with success, and his outlook narrowed to the one idea. Let me get away. But where? Martzburg? Would the chatelaine let him follow her? It was too near Basle. He clasped his hands over his hot brow, calling on Jacobea. As he dallied and trembled with his fears and terrors, one entered the hall from the little door leading to the Emperor's chamber. Hugh of Rooselaare, holding a lamp. A feverish feeling of guilt made Theirry draw back. The Lord of Rooselaare held up the lamp, glanced down and along the empty seats, then noticed the crimson flowers by Ysabeau's chair, and picked them up. As he raised his head his grey eyes caught Theirry's glance. "Ah, the Queen's Chamberlain's scrivener," he said. "Do you chance to know how these roses came here?" "Nay," answered Theirry hastily, "I could not know." "They do not grow in the palace garden," remarked Hugh. He laid them on the throne, and walked the length of the table, scrutinizing the dishes and goblets. In the flare of flambeaux and candles there was no need for his lamp, but he continued to hold it aloft as if he hoped it held some special power. Suddenly he stopped, and called to Theirry in his quiet, commanding way. The young man obeyed unwillingly. " Look at that," said Hugh of Rooselaare grimly. He pointed to 2 small marks in the table, black holes in the wood. " Burns," said Theirry with pale lips, " from the candles, lord." " Candles do not burn in such a fashion." As he spoke Hugh came round the table and cast the lamplight over the shadowed floor. " What is that?" He bent down before the window. Theirry saw that he motioned to a great scar in the board, as if fire had been flung and had bitten into the wood before extinguished. The Lord of Rooselaare lifted a grim face. " I tell you the flames that made that mark are now burning the heart and blood out of Melchoir of Brabant." " Do not say that, do not speak so loud," cried Theirry desperately. " It cannot be true." Hugh set his lamp upon the table. " I am not afraid of the Eastern witch," he said sternly. " The man was my friend, and she has bewitched and poisoned him. Now, God hear me, and you, scrivener, mark my vow, if I do not publish this before the land." A new hope rose in Theirry's heart. If this lord would denounce the Empress before power was hers, if her guilt could be brought home before all men, yet through no means of his own, why, she and Dirk might be defeated yet. " Well," he said hoarsely, " make haste, lord, for when the breath is out of the Emperor it is too late. She will have means to silence you, and even now be careful, she has many champions." Hugh of Rooselaare smiled slowly. " You speak wisely, scrivener, and know, I think, something. Hereafter I shall question you." Theirry made a gesture for silence. A heavy step sounded on the stair, and Balthasar, pallid but still magnificent, swept into the room. A great war sword clattered after him; he wore a gorget and carried his helmet. His blue eyes were wild in his colourless face; he gave Hugh a look of some defiance. " Melchoir is dying," he said, his tone rough with emotion, " and I must go look after the soldiery or some adventurer will seize the town." " Dying," repeated Hugh. " Who is with him?" " The Empress. They have sent for the bishop; until he come none is to enter the chamber." " By whose command?" " By the order of the Empress." " Yet I will go." The soldier paused at the doorway. " Well, ye were his friend, belike she will let you in." He swung away with a chink of steel. " Belike she will not," said Hugh, " but I can make the endeavour." With no further glance at the shuddering young man who held himself rigid against the wall, Hugh of Rooselaare ascended to the Emperor's chamber. He found the anteroom crowded with courtiers and monks; the Emperor's door was closed, and before it stood 2 black mutes brought by the Empress from Greece. Hugh touched a black-robed brother on the arm. " By what authority are we excluded from the Emperor's deathbed?" Several answered him. " The Queen; she claims to know as much of medicine as any of the physicians." " She is in possession." Hugh shouldered his way through them. " Certes, I must see him — and her." But not one stepped forward to aid or encourage. Melchoir was beyond protecting his adherents; he was no longer Emperor, but a man who might be reckoned with the dead. The Empress and Balthasar of Courtrai had already seized the governance, and who dared interfere? The great nobles even held themselves in reserve and were silent. But Hugh of Rooselaare's blood was up; he had always held Ysabeau vile, nor had he any love for the Margrave, whose masterful hand he saw in this. " Since none of you will stand by me," he cried, speaking aloud to the throng, " I will by myself enter and by myself take the consequences." He advanced to the door with his sword drawn and ready, and the crowd drew back, neither supporting nor preventing. The slaves closed together and made a gesture warning him to retire. He seized one by his gilt collar and swung him violently against the wall. Then, while the other crouched in fear, he opened the door and strode into the Emperor's bedchamber. It was a low room hung with gold and brown tapestry. The windows were shut and the air faint. The bed stood against the wall, and the heavy dark curtains, looped back, revealed Melchoir of Brabant, lying in his clothes on the coverlet, with his throat bare and his eyes staring across the room. A silver lamp stood on a table by the window, and its faint radiance was the only light. On the steps of the bed stood Isabeau. Over her white dress she had flung a long scarlet cloak, and her pale bright hair had fallen on to her shoulders. At the sight of Hugh, she caught hold of the bed hangings and gazed at him fiercely. He sheathed his sword as he came across the room. "Princess, I must see the Emperor," he said sternly. "He will see no man. He knows none, nor can he speak," she answered, her bearing prouder and more assured than he had ever known it. "Get you gone, sir. I know not how ye forced an entry." "You have no power to keep the nobles from their lord," he replied, "nor will I take your bidding. I will have you put without the doors if you so disturb the dying." But Hugh of Rooselaare advanced to the bed. "Let me see him," he demanded. "He speaks to me." The Empress drew the curtain, further concealing the dying man. "He speaks to none. Begone!" As she spoke, Hugh sprang lightly and suddenly on to the steps, pushed aside the slight figure of the Empress and caught back the curtains. "Melchoir!" he cried, and snatched up the Emperor by the shoulders. "He is dead," breathed the Empress. With a slow step she went to the table and seated herself beside the silver lamp, while she uttered sigh on sigh and clasped her hands over her eyes. Then the hot stillness began to quiver with the distant sound of numerous bells. They were holding service for the dying in every church in Frankfort. The Emperor stirred in Hugh's arms. Without opening his eyes, he spoke. "Pray for me, Balthasar. They did not slay me honorably." He raised his hands to his heart, to his lips, moaned and sank from Hugh's arm to the pillow. "Quia apud Dominum misericordia et copiosa apudium," he murmured. "Eum redemptio," flushed Hugh. "Amen," moaned Melchoir of Brabant, and so died. For a moment the chamber was silent, save for the insistent bells. Then Hugh turned his white face from the dead, and Isabeau shivered to her feet. "Call in the others," murmured the Empress, "since he is dead." "Ay, I will call in the others, thou Eastern witch, and show them the man thou hast murdered." She stared at him a moment, her face like a mask of ivory set in the glittering hair. "Murdered?" she said at last. "Murdered." He fingered his sword fiercely. "And it shall be my duty to see you brought to the stake for this night's work." She gave a shriek and ran towards the door. Before she reached it, it was flung open, and Balthasar of Courtrai sprang into the room. "You called?" he panted, his eyes blazing on Hugh of Rooselaare. "Yes, he is dead. Melchoir is dead, and this lord says I slew him. Balthasar, answer for me." "Certes," cried Hugh, "a fitting one to speak for you, your accomplice." With a short sound of rage the Margrave dragged out his sword and struck the speaker a blow across the breast with the flat of it. "So ho!" he shouted. "It pleases you to lie?" He yelled to his men without, and the death chamber was filled with a clatter of arms that drowned the mournful peals of the bells. "Take away this lord on my authority." Hugh drew his sword, only to have it wrenched away. The soldiers closed round him and swept their prisoner from the chamber, while Balthasar, flushed and furious, watched him dragged off. "I always hated him," he said. Isabeau fell on her knees and kissed his mailed feet. "Melchoir is dead, and I have no champion save you." The Margrave stooped and raised her, his face burning with blushes till it was like a great rose. "Isabeau, Isabeau," he stammered. She struggled out of his arms. "Nay, not now," she whispered in a stifled voice. "Not now can I speak to you, but afterwards, my lord, my lord." She went to the bed and flung herself across the steps, her face hidden in her hands. Balthasar took off his helmet, crossed himself, and humbly bent his great head. Melchoir IV lay stiffly on the lily-sown coverlet, and without the great bells tolled and the monk's chant rose. De profundis. End of section 17. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 18 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 18, The Pursuit of Jacobea. The chatelaine of Martzburg sat in the best guest chamber of a wayside hostel that lay a few hours' journeying from her home. So swiftly had she fled from Frankfort that its last scenes were still before her eyes, like a gorgeous and disjointed pageant. The Emperor stricken down at the feast, the brief flashing turmoil, Isabeau's peerless face, that her own horrid thoughts coloured with a sinister expression. Balthasar of Courtrai bringing the city to his feet, Hugh of Roussellerie snatched away to a dungeon, and over it all the leaping red light of 100 flambeaux. Presently she passed into the little bedchamber and took up a mirror into which she gazed long and earnestly. "Is it a wicked face?" she answered herself. "No, no." "Is it a weak face?" Alas! The wind rose higher, fluttered the lamp flame, and stirred the arras on the wall, and laying the mirror down, she returned to the outer chamber. Up and down walked Jacobea of Martzburg, clasping and unclasping her soft young hands, her grey eyes turning from right to left. She wished she had asked for a fire, and that she had kept one of the women to sleep with her. It was so lonely. She wanted to go to the door and call someone, but a curious heaviness in her limbs began to make movement irksome. She could no longer drag her steps, and with a sigh she sank into the frayed velvet chair by the fireplace. She tried to tell herself that she was free, that she was on her way to escape, but could not form the words on her lips, hardly the thought. Her head throbbed, and a cold sensation gripped her heart. She moved in the chair, only to feel as if held down in it. She struggled in vain to rise. "Barbara," she whispered, and thought she was calling aloud. Her brain whirled with memories, with anticipations and vague expectations, tinged with fear like the sensations of a dream. She felt that she was sinking into soft, enfolding darkness. The lamp flame changed into a 5-pointed star that rested on a knight's helm. The sound of wind and rain became faint human cries. She whispered, as the dying emperor had done, "I am bewitched." Then the knight, with the star glittering above his brow, came towards her and offered her a goblet. Sebastian!" she cried, and sat up with a face of horror. The chamber was spinning about her. She saw the knight's long painted shield and his bare hand holding out the wine. His visor was down. She shrieked and laughed together and put the goblet aside. Someone spoke out of the mystery. "The Empress found happiness. Why not you? May not a woman die as easily as a man?" She tried to remember her prayers, to find her crucifix, but the cold edge of the gold touched her lips, and she drank. The hot wine scorched her throat and filled her with strength. As she sprang up, the night's star quivered back into the lamp flame. The vapours cleared from the room. She found herself staring at Dirk Renswoude, who stood in the centre of the room and smiled at her. "Oh!" she cried in a bewildered way, and put her hands to her forehead. "Well?" said Dirk. He held a rich gold goblet, empty, and his was the voice she had already heard. "Why did you leave Frankfort?" Jacobea shuddered. I do not know." Her eyes were blank and dull. "I think I was afraid." "Lest you might do as Isabeau did?" asked Dirk. "What has happened to me?" was all her answer. "What of your steward?" whispered Dirk. "I have no steward. I am going alone to Martzburg." Dirk set the goblet beside the lamp. The while he watched her intently with frowning eyes. "What of Sebastian?" he repeated. "Ye fled from him, but have ye ceased to think of him?" "No," said the chatelaine of Martzburg. "No, day and night. What is God that he lets a man's face to come between me and him?" "The Emperor is dead," said Dirk. "Is dead," she repeated. "Isabeau knows how." "Ah," she whispered, I think I knew it." "Shall the Empress be happy and you starve your heart to death?" Jacobea sighed. "Sebastian, Sebastian." She had the look of one walking in sleep. "What is Sybilla to you?" "His wife," answered Jacobea in the same tone. "His wife." "The dead do not bind the living." Jacobea laughed. "No, no. How cold it is here. Do you not feel the wind across the floor?" Her fingers wandered aimlessly over her bosom. "Sybilla is dead, you say?" "Nay, Sybilla might die so easily." Jacobea laughed again. "Isabeau did it. She is young and fair," she said, "and she could do it. Why not I? But I cannot bear to look on death." Her expressionless eyes turned on Dirk still in sightless fashion. "A word," said Dirk. "That is all your part. Send him ahead to Martzburg." Jacobea nodded aimlessly. "Why not? Why not? Sybilla would be in bed, lying awake, listening to the wind as I have done so often, and he would come up the steep dark stairs. Oh, and she would raise her head." Dirk put in. "Has the chatelaine spoken? She would say, and he would make an end of it." "Perhaps she would be glad to die," said Jacobea dreamily. "I have thought that I should be glad to die." "And Sebastian?" said Dirk. Her strangely altered face lit and changed. "Does he care for me?" she asked piteously. "Enough to make life and death of little moment," answered Dirk. "Has he not followed you from Frankfort?" "Followed me?" murmured Jacobea. "I thought he had forsaken me." "Sebastian," said Dirk softly. He waved his little hand, and the steward appeared in the dark doorway of the inner room. He looked from one to the other swiftly, and his face was flushed and dangerous. "Sebastian," said Jacobea. There was no change in voice nor countenance. He came across the room to her, speaking as he came, but a sudden fresh gust of wind without scattered his words. "Have you followed me?" she asked. Yea, he answered hoarsely, staring at her. He had not dreamed a living face could look so white as hers. No, nor dead face either. He dropped to one knee before her and took her limp hand. She bent forward, and with her other hand touched his tumbling hair. "Lord of Martzburg, and my lord," she said, and smiled sweetly. "Do you know how much I love you, Sebastian? Why, you must ask the image of the Virgin, I have told her so often, and no one else, nay, no one else." Sebastian sprang to his feet. "Oh God!" he cried. "I am ashamed. Ye have bewitched her. She knows not what she says." Dirk turned on him fiercely. "Did ye not curse me when ye thought she had escaped? Did I not swear to recover her for you? Is she not yours? Saint Gabriel cannot save her now." "If she had not said that," muttered Sebastian. He turned distracted eyes upon her standing with no change in her expression, the tips of her fingers resting on the table, her wide grey eyes gazing before her. "Fool," answered Dirk. "And she did not love you? What chance had you? I left my fortunes to help you to this prize, and I will not see you palter now. Lady, speak to him." "Ay, speak to me," cried Sebastian earnestly. "Tell me if it be your wish that I, at all costs, should become your husband. Tell me if it is your will that the woman in our ways should go." A slow passion stirred the calm of her face, her eyes glittered. "Yes," she said, "yes." "Jacobea!" He took her arm and drew her close to him. "Look me in the face and repeat that to me. Think if it is worth hell to you and me." She gazed up at him, then hid her face on his sleeve. "Ay, hell," she answered heavily. "Go to Martzburg tonight. She cannot claim you when she is dead. How I have striven not to hate her, my lord, my husband." He put her from him into the worn old chair. "I will come back to you tomorrow." The wind rushed between them and made the lamp flame leap wildly. "Make haste," cried Dirk. "Away, the horse is below." Sebastian opened the door on to the dark stairway and went softly out. "Now it is done," murmured Dirk in a swelling whisper, "and she is lost." He snatched up the lamp, and holding it aloft looked down at the drooping figure in the chair. Jacobea's head sank back against the tarnished velvet, there was a smile on her white lips, and her hand rested in her lap. Even with Dirk's intent face bending over her and the full light pouring down on her, she did not look up. "Gold hair and grey eyes, and her little feet," murmured Dirk. "One of God's own flowers. What are you now?" Jacobea moved in her seat. "Is he gone?" she asked fearfully. "Certes, he has gone," smiled Dirk. "Would you have him dally on such an errand?" Jacobea rose swiftly and stood a moment listening to the unhappy wind. "I thought he was here," she said under her breath. "I thought that he had come at last." "He came," said Dirk. The chatelaine looked swiftly round at him, there was a dawning knowledge in her eyes. "Who are you?" she demanded, and her voice had lost its calm. "What has happened?" "Do you not remember me?" smiled Dirk. Jacobea staggered back. "Why," she stammered, "he was here, down at my feet, and we spoke about Sybilla." "And now?" said Dirk. "He is gone to free you of Sybilla, as you bid him." "As I bid him?" "At this moment he rides to Martzburg on this service of yours, and I must be gone to Frankfort where my fortunes wait. For you these words: should you meet again one Theirry, a pretty scholar, do not prate to him of God and judgment, nor try to act the saint. Let him alone. He is no matter of yours, and maybe some woman cares for him as ye care for Sebastian, and will hold him, though she have not yellow hair." "You are the devil!" she shrieked. "I have delivered myself unto the devil." She beat her hands together and fell towards his feet. Dirk stepped close and peered curiously into her unconscious face. "Why, she is not so fair," he murmured, "and grief will spoil her bloom, and 'twas only her face he loved." He extinguished the lamp and smiled into the darkness. He drew the curtain away from the deep-set window, and the moon, riding the storm clouds like a silver-armoured Amazon, cast a ghastly light over the huddled figure of Jacobea of Martzburg, and threw her shadow dark and trailing across the cold floor. Dirk left the chamber and the hostel unseen and unheard. The wind made too great a clamour for stray sounds to tell. Out in the wild wet night he paused a moment to get his bearings, then turned towards the shed where he and Sebastian had left their horses. There were the chatelain's horses asleep in their stalls, here was his own, but the place beside it where Sebastian's steed had waited was empty. Dirk, shivering a little in the tempest, unfastened his horse and was prepared to depart, when a near sound arrested him. Someone was moving in the straw at the back of the shed. Dirk listened, his hand on the bridle, till a moonbeam striking across his shoulder revealed a cloaked figure rising from the ground. The stranger got to his feet. "I have but taken shelter here, sir," he said, deeming it too late to rouse the hostel. "Theirry!" cried Dirk, and laughed excitedly. "Now this is strange." The figure came forward. "Theirry, yes. Have you followed me?" he exclaimed wildly, and his face showed drawn and wan in the silver light. "I left Frankfort to escape you. What fiend's trick has brought you here?" "Are you afraid of me, Theirry?" Dirk asked mournfully. "Certes, there is no need." But Theirry cried out at him with the fierceness of one at bay. "Begone! I want none of you nor of your kind. I know how the Emperor died, and I fled from a city where such as you came to power, even as Jacobea of Martzburg did. I am come after her." "And where think you to find her?" asked Dirk. "By now she is at Basle." "Are ye not afraid to go to Basle?" Theirry trembled and stepped back into the shadows of the shed. "I want to save my soul. No, I am not afraid; if need be I will confess." Dirk laughed. "At the shrine of Jacobea of Martzburg? Look to it she be not trampled in the mire by then." "You lie, you malign her," cried the other in strong agitation. But Dirk turned on him with imperious sternness. "I did not leave Frankfort on a fool's errand. I was triumphant, at the high tide of my fortunes, my foot on Ysabeau's neck. I had good reason to have left this alone. Come with me to Martzburg and see my work, and know the saint you worship." "Is the chatelaine there?" "If not yet, she will be soon. Take one of these horses," he added. "I know not your meaning," answered Theirry fearfully, "but my road was to Martzburg. I mean to pray Jacobea, who left without a word to me, to give me some small place in her service." "Belike she will," mocked Dirk. Impatiently and feverishly Theirry unfastened and prepared himself a mount. "If ye have evil designs on her," he cried, "be very sure ye will be defeated, for her strength is as the strength of angels." Dirk delicately guided his steed out of the shed. The moon had at last conquered the cloud battalions, and a clear cold light revealed the square dark shape of the hostel, the flapping sign, the bare pine trees, and the long glimmer of the road. Dirk's eyes turned to the blank window of the room where Jacobea lay, and he smiled wickedly. "The night has cleared," he said, as Theirry leading one of the Chatelaine's horses, came out of the stable, and we should reach Martzburg before the dawn. End of section 18. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 19 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 19, Sibylla. Sebastian paused on the steep, dark stairs and listened. Castle Martzburg was utterly silent. He knew that there were 1 or 2 servants only within the walls, and that they slept at a distance. He knew that his cautious entry by the donjon door had made no sound, yet on every other step or so he stood still and listened. He had procured a light. It fluttered in danger of extinction in the draughty stairway, and he had to shield it with his hand. Once, when he stopped, he took from his belt the keys that had gained him admission and slipped them into the bosom of his doublet. Hanging at his waist, they made a little jingling sound as he moved. When he gained the great hall, he opened the door as softly and slowly as if he did not know emptiness alone awaited him the other side. He entered, and his little light only served to show the expanses of gloom. It was very cold. He could hear the rain falling in a thin stream from the lips of the gargoyles without. He remembered that same sound on the night the 2 students took shelter, the night when the deed he was about to do had, by a devil, in a whisper, been first put into his head. He crossed to the hearth and set the lamp in the niche by the chimney-piece. He wished there was a fire. Certainly it was cold. The dim rays of the lamp showed the ashes on the hearth, the cushions in the window-seat, and something that, even in that dullness, shone with fiery hue. Sebastian looked at it in a half horror. It was Sibylla's red lily, finished and glowing from a samite cushion. By the side of it slept Jacobia's little grey cat. The steward, gazing in curiously intent fashion, recalled the fact that he had never conversed with his wife and never liked her. He could not tell of one sharp word between them, yet had she said she hated him he would have felt no surprise. He wondered, in case he had ever loved her, would he have been here tonight on this errand? Lord of Martzburg, lord of as fine a domain as any in the empire, with a chance of the imperial crown itself. Nay, had he loved his wife it would have made no difference. What sorry fool even would let a woman interfere with a great destiny? Lord of Martzburg. With little reflection on the inevitable for his wife, he fell to considering Jacobia. Until tonight she had been a cipher to him. That she favored him a mere voucher for his crime, for the procuring of this or that for him. A fact to be accepted and used, but that she should pray about him, speak as she had, that was another matter, and for the first time in his cold life he was both moved and ashamed. His thin dark face flushed. He looked askance at the red lily, and took the light from its niche. The shadows seemed to gather and throng out of the silence, bearing down on him and urging him forward. He found the little door by the fireplace open, and ascended the steep stone stairs to his wife's room. Here there was not even the drip of the rain or the wail of the wind to disturb the stillness. He had taken off his boots, and his silk-clad feet made no sound, but he could not hush the catch of his breath and the steady thump of his heart. When he reached her room, he paused again, and again listened. Nothing. How could there be? Had he not come so softly even the little cat had slept on undisturbed? He opened the door and stepped in. It was a small, low chamber. The windows were unshrouded, and fitful moonlight played upon the floor. Sebastian looked at once towards the bed that stood to his left. It was hung with dark arras, now drawn back from the pillows. Sibylla was asleep. Her thick, heavy hair lay outspread under her cheek. Her flesh and the bedclothes were turned to one dazzling whiteness by the moon. Worked into the coverlet that had slipped half to the polished floor were great wreaths of purple roses, showing dim yet gorgeous. Her shoes stood on the bed steps. Her clothes were flung over a chair. Near by, a crucifix hung against the wall, with her breviary on a shelf beneath. The passing storm clouds cast luminous shadows across the chamber, but they were becoming fainter. The tempest was dying away. Sebastian put the lamp on a low coffer inside the door and advanced to the bed. A large dusky mirror hung beside the window, and in it he could see his wife again, reflected dimly in her ivory whiteness with the dark lines of her hair and brows. He came to the bedside so that his shadow was flung across her sleeping face. "Sibylla," he said. Her regular breathing did not change. "Sibylla." Now she stirred. He heard her fetch a sigh, as one who wakens reluctantly from soft dreams. "Do you not hear me speak? Sibylla!" From the bewildering glooms of the bed he heard her silk bedclothes rustle and slip. The moon came forth again and revealed her sitting up, wide awake now and staring at him. "So you have come home, Sebastian," she said. "Why did you rouse me?" He looked at her in silence. She shook back her hair from her eyes. "What is it?" she asked softly. "The Emperor died," said Sebastian. "I know. What is that to me? Bring the light, Sebastian. I cannot see your face." "There is no need. The Emperor had not time to pray, and I would not deal so with you, therefore I woke you." "Sebastian!" "By my mistress's commands you must die tonight, and by my desire I shall be Lord of Martzburg, and there is no other way." She put her hand to her long throat. "I wondered if you would ever say this to me. I did not think so, for it did not enter my mind that she could give commands." "Then you knew?" Sibylla smiled. "Before ever you did, Sebastian, and I have so thought of it, in these long days when I have been alone. It seemed that I must sew it even into my embroidering. Jacobea loves Sebastian." He gripped the bedpost. "I am not here to talk of that," answered Sebastian. "Nor have we long, the dawn is not far off." Sibylla rose, letting her long feet on the bedstep. "So I must die," she said, "must die. Certes, I have not lived so ill that I should fear to die, nor so pleasantly that I should yearn to live. It will be a poor thing in you to kill me, but no shame to me to be slain, my lord." As she stood now against the shadowed curtains, her hair caught the lamplight and flashed into red gold about her colourless face. Sebastian looked at her with hatred and some terror, but she smiled strangely at him. "You never knew me, Sebastian, but I am very well acquainted with you, and I do scorn you so utterly that I am sorry for the chatelaine." "She and I will manage that," answered Sebastian fiercely, "and if you seek to divert or delay me by this talk it is useless, for I am resolved, nor will I be moved." She moved from the bed in the long linen garment that she wore, slim and childish to see. She took a wrap of gold-coloured silk from a chair and put it about her. The man gazed at her the while with sullen eyes. She glanced at the crucifix. "I have nothing to say. God knows it all. I am ready." "I do not want your soul," he cried. Sibylla smiled. "I made confession yesterday. How cold it is for this time of year. I do not shiver for fear, my lord." "Make haste," breathed Sebastian. His wife raised her face. "How long have we been wed?" she asked. "Let that be." He paled and bit his lip. 3 years, nay, not 3 years. When I am dead, give my embroideries to Jacobea. They are in these coffers. I have finished the red lily. I was sewing it when the 2 scholars came. That night she first knew, and you first knew, but I had known a long while. Sebastian caught up the lamp. Be silent, or speak to God," he said. She came gently across the floor, holding the yellow silk at her breast. "What are you going to do with me?" she whispered. "Strangle me? Nay, they would see that afterwards." Sebastian went to a little door that opened beside the bed and pulled aside the arras. "That leads to the battlements," she said. He pointed to the dark steps. "Go up, Sybilla." He held the lamp above his haggard face, and the light of it fell over the narrow, winding stone steps. She looked at them and ascended. Sebastian followed, closing the door after him. In a few moments they were out on the donjon roof. The vast stretch of sky was clear now and paling for the dawn. Faint, pale clouds clustered round the dying moon, and the scattered stars pulsed wearily. Below them lay the dark masses of the other portions of the castle, and beside them rose the straining pole and wind-tattered banner of Jacobea of Martzburg. Sybilla leant against the battlements, her hair fluttering over her face. "How cold it is," she said in a trembling voice. "Make haste, my lord." He was shuddering too, in the keen, insistent wind. "Will you not pray?" he asked again. "No," she answered, and looked at him vacantly. "If I shriek, would anyone hear me? Will it be more horrible than I thought? Make haste, or I shall be afraid." She crouched against the stone, shivering violently. Sebastian put the lamp upon the ground. "Take care it does not go out," she said, and laughed. "You would not like to find your way back in the dark. The little cat will be sorry for me." She broke off to watch what he was doing. A portion of the tower projected. Here the wall was of a man's height and pierced with arblast holes. Through there Sybilla had often looked and seen the country below framed in the stone like a picture in a letter of an aura. So small it seemed, and yet clear and brightly coloured. Beneath the wall was a paving stone, raised at will by an iron ring. When lifted, it revealed a sheer open drop the entire height of the donjon, through which stones and fire could be hurled in time of siege upon the assailants in the courtyard below. But Jacobea had always shuddered at it, nor had there been occasion to open it for many years. Sybilla saw her husband strain at the ring, and bend over the hole and step forward. "Must it be that way? Oh, Jesu, Jesu, shall I not be afraid?" She clasped her hands and fixed her eyes on the figure of Sebastian as he raised the slab and revealed the black aperture. Quickly he stepped back as stone rang on stone. "So," he said, "I shall not touch you, and it will be swiftly over. Walk across, Sybilla." She closed her eyes and drew a long breath. "Have you not the courage?" he cried violently. "Then I must hurl you from the battlements. It shall not look like murder." She turned her face to the beautiful brightening sky. "My soul is not afraid, but how my body shrinks! I do not think I can do it." He made a movement towards her. At that she gathered herself. "No, you shall not touch me." Across the donjon roof she walked with a firm step. "Farewell, Sebastian, may God assoil me and thee." She put her hands to her face and moaned as her foot touched the edge of the hole. No shriek nor cry disturbed the serenity of the night. She made no last effort to save herself, but disappeared silently to the blackness of her death. Sebastian listened to the strange, indefinite sound of it, and drops of terror gathered on his brow. Then all was silent again, save for the monotonous flap of the banner. "Lord of Martzburg," he muttered to steady himself. "Lord of Martzburg." He dropped the stone into place, picked up the lantern, and returned down the close, cold stairs. Her room, on the pillow the mark where her head had lain, her clothes over the coffer. Well, he hated her no less than he had ever done. To the last she had shamed him. Why had he been so long? Too long. Soon someone would be stirring, and he must be far from Martzburg before they found Sybilla. He crept from the chamber with the same unnecessary stealth he had observed in entering, and in a cautious manner descended the stairs to the great hall. The pale glow of a dreary dawn filled the great hall as he entered it. The grey cat was still asleep, and the shining silks of the red lilies shone like the hair of the strange woman who had worked it patiently into the samite. He tiptoed across the hall, descended the wider stairs, and made his way to the first chamber of the donjon. Carefully he returned the lamp to the niche where he had found it, wondering, as he extinguished it, if any would note that it had been burnt that night. Carefully he drew on his great muddy boots and crept out by the little postern door into the court. So sheltered was the castle, and situated in so peaceful a place, that when the chatelaine was not within the walls, the huge outer gates that required many men to close them stood open on to the hillside. Beyond them Sebastian saw his patient horse, fastened to the ring of the bell chain, and beyond him the clear grey-blue hills and trees. His road lay open, yet he closed the door slowly behind him and hesitated. He strove with a desire to go and look at her. He knew just how she had fallen. When he had first come to Martzburg, the hideous hole in the battlements exercised a great fascination over him. He had often flung down stones, clods of grass, and even once a book, that he might hear the hollow whistling sound and imagine a furious enemy below. Afterwards he had noticed these things, and how they struck the bottom of the shaft, lying where she would be now. He desired to see her, yet loathed the thought of it. There was his horse, there the open road, and Jacobea waiting a few miles away, yet he must linger while the accusing daylight gathered about him. While the rising sun discovered him, he must dally with the precious moments, bite the ends of his black hair, frown and stare at the round tower of the donjon the other side of which she lay. At last he crossed the rough cobbles, skirted the keep, and stood still, looking at her. Yes, he had pictured her, yet he saw her more distinctly than he had imagined he would in this grey light. Her hair and her cloak seemed to be wrapped close about her. One hand still clung to her face. Her feet showed bare and beautiful. Sebastian crept nearer. He wanted to see her face, and if her eyes were open, to be certain. Also, if that dark red that lay spread on the ground was all her scattered locks. The light was treacherous. He was stooping to touch her when the quick sound of an approaching horseman made him draw back and glance round. But before he could even tell himself it were well to fly, they were upon him. 2 horsemen, finely mounted, the foremost Dirk Renswoude, bareheaded, a rich colour in his cheek and a sparkle in his eye. He reined up the slim brown horse. "So, it is done," he cried, leaning from the saddle towards Sebastian. The steward stepped back. "Whom have you with you?" he asked in a shaking voice. "A friend of mine, and a suitor to the chatelaine, of which folly you and I shall cure him." Theirry pressed forward, the hoofs of his striving horse making musical clatter on the cobbles. "The steward!" he cried, "and—" his voice sank. He turned burning eyes on Dirk. "The steward's wife that was," smiled the youth. "But certes, you must do him worship now, he will be lord of Martzburg." Sebastian was staring at Sybilla. "You tell too much," he muttered. "Nay, my friend is one with me, and I can answer for his silence." Dirk patted the horse's neck and laughed again, laughter with a high triumphant note in it. Theirry swung round on him in a desperate bitter fierceness. "Why have you brought me here? Where is the chatelaine? By God his saints, that woman has been murdered!" Dirk turned in the saddle and faced him. "Ay, and by Jacobea of Martzburg's commands." Theirry laughed aloud. "The lie is dead as you give it being," he answered, "nor can all your devilry make it live." "Sebastian," said Dirk, "has not this woman come to her death by the chatelaine's commands?" He pointed to Sybilla. "You know it, since in your presence she bade me hither," answered Sebastian heavily. Dirk's voice rose, clear and musical. "You see, your piece of uprightness thought highly of her steward, and that she might endow him with her hand, his wife must die." "Peace, peace!" cried Sebastian fiercely, and Theirry rose in his saddle. "It is a lie," he repeated wildly. "If 'tis not a lie, God has turned his face from me and I am lost indeed." "If 'tis no lie," cried Dirk exultingly, "you are mine. Did ye not swear it?" "And she be this thing you name her?" answered Theirry passionately. "Then the devil is cunning indeed, and I his servant. But if you speak false I will kill you at her feet." "And by that will I abide," smiled Dirk. "Sebastian, you shall return with us to give this news to your mistress." "Is she not here?" cried Theirry. Dirk pointed to the silver-plated harness. "You ride her horse. See her arms upon his breast? Sweet fool, we left her behind in the hostel, waiting the steward's return." "Always ye trap and deceive me!" exclaimed Theirry hotly. "Let us be gone," said Sebastian. He looked at Dirk as if at his master. "Is it not time for us to be gone?" It was full daylight now, though the sun had not yet risen above the hills. The lofty walls and high towers of the huge grey castle blocked up the sky and threw into the gloom the three in their shadow. "Hark!" said Dirk, and lifted his finger delicately. A white horse appeared against the cold misty background of the grey country. A woman was in the saddle, Jacobea of Martzburg. She paused, peered up at the high little windows in the donjon, then turned her gaze on the silent three. "Now can the chatelaine speak for herself?" breathed Dirk. Theirry gave a great sigh, his eyes fixed with a painful intensity on the approaching lady, but she did not seem to see either of them. "Sebastian!" she cried, and drew rein, gazing at him. "Where is your wife?" Her words rang on the cold clear air like strokes of a bell. "Sybilla died last night," answered the steward, "but I did not. And you should not have come." Jacobea shaded her brows with her gloved hand and stared past the speaker. "What is that on the ground?" she cried. "Sybilla! He has slain Sybilla! But, sirs," she looked round her distractedly, "ye must not blame him. He saw my wish." "From your own lips!" cried Theirry. "Who are you who speak?" she demanded haughtily. "I sent him to slay Sybilla." She interrupted herself with a hideous shriek. "Sebastian, ye are stepping in her blood!" And letting go of the reins she sank from the saddle. The steward caught her, and as she slipped from his hold to her knees her unconscious head came near to the stiff white feet of the dead. "Her yellow hair!" cried Dirk. "Let us leave her to her steward. You and I have another way." "May God curse her as he has me," said Theirry in an agony, "for she has slain my hope of heaven." "You will not leave me?" called Sebastian. "What shall I say? What shall I do?" "Lie, and lie again," answered Dirk with a wild air. "Wed the dame and damn her people, let fly your authority and break her heart as quickly as you may." "Amen to that," added Theirry. "And now to Frankfort!" cried Dirk, exultant. They set their horses to a furious pace and galloped out of Castle Martzburg. End of section 19. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 20 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 20, Hugh of Rooselaare. Dirk took off his riding coat and listened with a smile to the quick step of Theirry overhead. He was again in the long, low chamber looking out on the witch's garden, and nothing was changed save that the roses bloomed no longer on the bare, thorny bushes. "So you have brought him back," said Nathalie, caressing the youth's soft sleeve. "Pulled his saint out of her shrine and given her over to the demons?" Dirk turned his head. A beautiful look was in his eyes. "Yea, I have brought him back," he said musingly. "You have done a foolish thing," grumbled the witch. "He will ruin you yet. Beware, for even now you hold him against his will. I marked his face as he went into the chamber." Dirk seated himself with a sigh. "In this matter I am not to be moved. And now some food, for I am so weary that I can scarcely think. Nathalie, the toll it has been, the rough roads, the delays, the long hours in the saddle, but it was worth it." The witch set the table with a rich service of ivory and silver. "Worth leaving your fortunes at the crisis? Ye left Frankfort the day after the Emperor died, and have been away 2 months. Isabeau thinks you dead." Dirk frowned. "No matter, tomorrow she shall know me living. Martzburg is far away, and the weather delayed us, but it had to be. Now I am free to work my own advancement." He drank eagerly of the wine put before him, and began to eat. "Ye have heard," asked Nathalie, "that Balthasar of Courtrai has been elected Emperor?" "Yea," smiled Dirk, "and is to marry Isabeau within the year. We knew it, did we not? Next spring they will go to Rome to receive the imperial crown." "I shall be with them," said Dirk. "Well, it is good to rest. What a thick fool Balthasar is." He smiled, and his eyes sparkled. "The Empress is a clever woman," answered the witch. "She came here once to know whither you had gone. I told her, for the jest, that you were dead. At that she must think her secret dead with you, yet she gave no sign of joy nor relief, nor any hint of what her business was. She is never betrayed by her puppet's face. An iron-hearted fiend, the Empress. They say, though, that she is a fool for Balthasar, a dog at his heels. Until she change." "Belike you will be her next fancy," said Nathalie. "The crystals always foretell a throne for you." Dirk laughed. "I do not mean to share my honours with any woman," he answered. "Pile up the fire, Nathalie. Certes, it is cold." He pushed back his chair with a half sigh on his lips, and turned contented eyes on the glowing hearth Nathalie replenished. "And none has thought evil of Melchoir's death?" he asked curiously. "Ay, there was Hugh of Rooselaare." Dirk sat up. "The Lord of Rooselaare?" "Certes, the night Melchoir died he flung murderous in the Empress's face." Dirk showed a grave, alert face. "I never heard of that." "Nay," answered the witch with some malice. "Ye were too well engaged in parting that boy from his love. It is a pretty jest. Certainly she is a clever woman. She enlists Balthasar as her champion. He becomes enraged, furious, and Hugh is cast into the dungeons for his pains." The witch laughed softly. "He would not retract, his case swayed to and fro, but Balthasar and the Empress always hated him. He had never a chance." Dirk rose and pressed his clasped hands to his temple. "What do you say? Never a chance?" "He is to die tonight at sunset." "He must not die, he on the scaffold? I, as you say, was following that boy and his love while this was happening." The witch fell back against the wall, while overhead the restless tread of Theirry sounded. Dirk dashed from the room and out into the quiet street. For a second he paused. It was late afternoon. He had perhaps an hour or an hour and a half. Clenching his hands, he drew a deep breath and turned in the direction of the palace at a steady run. By reason of the snow clouds and bitter cold, there were few abroad to notice the slim figure running swiftly and lightly. Those who were about made their way in the direction of the marketplace, where the Lord of Rooselaare was presently to meet his death. Dirk arrived at the palace, one hand over his heart, stinging him with the pain of his great speed. He demanded the Empress. None among the guards knew either him or his name, but at his imperious insistence they sent word by a page to Ysabeau that the young Doctor Constantine had a desire to see her. The boy returned, and Dirk was admitted instantly, smiling gloomily to think with what feelings Ysabeau would look on him. So far all had been swiftly accomplished. He was conducted to her private chamber, and brought face to face with her while he still panted from his running. Until the page had gone, neither spoke. Then Dirk said quickly, "I returned to Frankfort today." Ysabeau was agitated to fear by his sudden appearance. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I thought you dead." "I have no time for speech with you now. You owe me something, do you not?" "Well, I am here to ask part payment." The Empress winced. "Well, what? I had no wish to be ungrateful. 'Twas you avoided me." She crossed to the hearth and fixed her superb eyes intently on the youth. "Hugh of Rooselaare is to die this evening," he said. "Yea," answered Ysabeau, and her childish loveliness darkened. For a while Dirk was silent. He showed suddenly frail and ill. On his face was an expression of emotion, mastered and held back. "He must not die," he said at last, and lifted his eyes, shadowed with fatigue. "That is what I demand of you, his pardon, now and at once. We have but little time." Ysabeau surveyed him curiously and fearfully. "You ask too much," she replied in a low tone. "Do you know why this man is to die?" "For speaking the truth," he said with a sudden sneer. The Empress flushed and clutched the embroidery on her bodice. "You of all men should know why he must be silenced," she retorted bitterly. "What is your reason for asking his life?" Dirk's mouth took on an ugly curl. "My reason is no matter, it is my will." "Have I made you so much my master?" she muttered. The young man answered impatiently, "You will give me his pardon and make haste, for I must ride with it to the marketplace." "I think I will not. I am not so afraid of you, and I hate this man. My secret is your secret, after all." Dirk gave a wan smile. "I can blast you as I blasted Melchoir of Brabant, Ysabeau, and do you think I have any fear of what you can say?" But he leaned towards her. "Suppose I go with what I know to Balthasar?" The name humbled the Empress like a whip held over her. "So I am helpless," she muttered, loathing him. "The pardon," insisted Dirk. "Sound the bell and write me a pardon." Still she hesitated. It was a hard thing to lose her vengeance against a dangerous enemy. "Choose another reward," she pleaded. "Of what value can this man's life be to you?" "You seek to put me off until it be too late," cried Dirk hoarsely. He stepped forward and seized the handbell on the table. "Now, an you show yourself obstinate, I go straight from here to Balthasar and tell him of the poisoning of Melchoir." Instinct and desire rose in Ysabeau to defy him with everything in her possession, from her guards to her nails. She shuddered with suppressed wrath and pressed her little clenched hands against the wall. Her chamberlain entered. "Write out a pardon for the Lord of Rooselaare," commanded Dirk, "and haste, as you love your place." When the man had gone, Isabeau turned with an ill-conceived savagery. "What will they think? What will Balthasar think?" "That must be your business," said Dirk wearily. "And Hugh himself?" flashed the Empress. The youth coloured painfully. "Let him be sent to his castle in Flanders," he said, with averted face. "He must not remain here." "So much you give in!" cried Ysabeau. "I do not understand you." He responded with a wild look. "No one will ever understand me, Ysabeau." The Chamberlain returned, and in a shaking hand the Empress took the parchment and the reed pen, while Dirk waved the man's dismissal. "Sign," he cried to her. Ysabeau set the parchment on the table and looked out at the gathering clouds. The Lord of Rooselaare must have already left the prison. She dallied with the pen, then took a little dagger from her hair and sharpened it. Dirk read her purpose in her lovely evil eyes, and snatched the lingering right hand into his own long fingers. The Empress drew together and looked up at him bitterly and darkly, but Dirk's breath stirred the ringlets that touched her cheek. His cool grip guided her reluctant pen. She shivered with fear and defiance. She wrote her name. Dirk flung her hand aside with a great sigh of relief. "Do not try to foil me again, Marozia Porphyrogenitus," he cried, and caught up the parchment, his hat and cloak. She watched him leave the room, heard the heavy door close behind him, and she writhed with rage, thrusting with an uncontrollable gesture of passion the dagger into the table. It quivered in the wood and then broke under her hand. With an ugly cry she ran to the window, flung it open and cast the handle out. When it rattled on the cobbled yard Dirk was already there. He marked it fall, knew the gold and red flash, and smiled. Showing the parchment signed by the Empress, he had commanded the swiftest horse in the stables. The market-place lay at the other end of the town, and the hour for the execution was close at hand, but the white horse he rode was fresh and strong. The thick grey clouds had obscured the sunset and covered the sky. A few trembling flakes of snow fell, a bitter wind blew between the high narrow houses. Here and there a light sparkling in a window emphasized the colourless cold without. Dirk urged the steed till he rocked in the saddle. He passed the high walls of the college, galloped over the bridge that crossed the sullen waters of the Main, swept by the open doors of St. Wolfram, then had to draw rein, for the narrow street began to be choked with people. He pulled his hat over his eyes and flung his cloak across the lower half of his face. With one hand he dragged on the bridle, with the other waved the parchment. "A pardon!" he cried. "A pardon! Make way!" They drew aside before the plunging steed. Some answered him. "It is no pardon. He wears not the Empress's livery." One seized his bridle. Dirk leant from the saddle and dashed the parchment into the fellow's face. The horse snorted, and plunging cleared away and gained the market-place. Here the press was enormous. Men, women, and children were gathered close round the mounted soldiers who guarded the scaffold. The armour, yellow and blue uniforms, and bright feathers of the horsemen showed vividly against the grey houses and greyer sky. On the scaffold were two dark, graceful figures. A man kneeling with his long throat bare, and a man standing with a double-edged sword in his hands. "A pardon!" shrieked Dirk. "In the name of the Emperor!" He was wedged in the crowd, who made bewildered movements but could not give place to him. The soldiers did not or would not hear. Dirk rose desperately in his stirrups. As he did so, the hat and cloak fell back, and his head and shoulders were revealed clearly above the swaying mass. Hugh of Rooselaare heard the cry, looked across the crowd, and his eyes met the eyes of Dirk Renswoude. "A pardon!" cried Dirk hoarsely. He saw the condemned man's lips move. The sword fell. "A woman screamed," said the monk on the scaffold, "and proclaimed a pardon." and he pointed to the commotion gathered about Dirk, while the executioner displayed to the crowd the serene head of Hugh of Rooselaare. "Nay, it was not a woman," one of the soldiers answered the monk. "'Twas this youth." Dirk forced to the foot of the scaffold. "Let me through," he said in a terrible voice. The guard parted, and seeing the parchment in his hand, let him mount the steps. "You bring a pardon," whispered the monk. "I am too late," said Dirk. He stood among the hurrying blood that stained the platform, and his face was hard. "Dogs! And this an end for a lord of Rooselaare!" he cried, and clasped his hand on a straining breast. "Could you not have waited a little, but a few moments more?" The snow was falling fast. It lay on Dirk's shoulders and on his smooth hair. The monk drew the parchment from his passive hand and read it in a whisper to the officer. They both looked askance at the young man. "Give me his head," said Dirk. The executioner had placed it at a corner of the scaffold. He left off wiping his sword and brought it forward. Dirk watched without fear or repulsion, and took Hugh's head in his slim fair hands. "How heavy it is," he whispered. The quick distortion of death had left the proud features. Dirk held the face close to his own, with no heed to the blood that trickled down his doublet. Priest and captain, standing apart, noticed a horrible likeness between the dead and the living, but would not speak of it. "Churl," said Dirk, gazing into the half-closed grey eyes that resembled so his own. "He spoke as he saw me. What did he say?" The headsman polished the mighty blade. "Naught to do with you, or with any," he answered. "The words had no meaning, certes." "What were they?" whispered the youth. "Have you come for me, Ursula?" Then he said again, "Ursula." A quiver ran through Dirk's frame. "She shall repent this, the Eastern witch," he said wildly. "May the devil snatch you all to bitter judgment." He turned to the captain with the head held against his breast. "What are you going to do with this?" "His wife has asked for his head and his body, that he may be buried befitting his estate." "His wife," echoed Dirk. Then slowly, "Ay, he had a wife." "And a son, sir?" "The child is dead." Dirk set the head down gently by the body. "And his lands?" he asked. "They go, sir, by favour of the Empress, to Balthasar of Courtrai, who married, as you may know, this lord's heiress, Ursula, dead now many years." The snow had scattered the crowd. The soldiers were impatient to be gone. "Sir," said the officer, "will you return with me to the palace, and we will tell the Empress how this mischance arose, and how you came too late?" "Nay," replied Dirk fiercely, "take that good news alone." He turned and descended the scaffold steps in a proud, gloomy manner. One of the soldiers held his horse. He mounted in silence and rode away. They who watched saw the thick snowflakes blot out the solitary figure, and shuddered with no cause they understood. End of section 20. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 21 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 21, Betrayed. Natalie stood at the door with a lantern in her hand. Dirk was returning. The witch held up the light to catch a glimpse of his face, then, whispering and crying under her breath, followed into the house. "There is blood on your shoes and on your breast," she whispered, when they reached the long chamber at the back. Dirk flung himself on a chair and moaned. The snow lay still on his hair and on his shoulders. He buried his face in the bend of his arm. "Zerdusht and his master have forsaken us," whimpered the witch. "I could work no spells tonight, and the mirror was blank. Dirk spoke in a muffled voice without raising his head. Of what use is magic to me? I should have stayed in Frankfurt. Nathalie drew his wet cloak from his shoulders. Have I not warned you? Has not the brass head warned you that the young scholar will be your ruin, bringing you to woe and misery and shame? Look at his blood on me, cried Dirk. His blood! Balthasar and Isabeau make merry with his lands, but my hate shall mean something to them yet. I should not have left Frankfurt. Alas, who was this man? I did all I could, whispered Dirk. The Empress shall burn in hell. The sickly creeping flames illuminated his pallid face and his small hand hanging clenched by his side. This is an evil day for us, moaned the witch. The spirits will not answer, the flames will not burn, some horrible misfortune threatens. Dirk turned his gaze into the half-dark room. Where is Theirry? Soon after you left he crept from his chamber, and his face was evil. He went into the street. Dirk paced up and down with uneven steps. He will come back. He must come back. Ah, my heart! You say Zerdusht will not speak tonight? The witch moaned and trembled over the fire. Nay, nor will the spirits come. Dirk shook his clenched fist in the air. They shall answer me. He went to the window, opened it, and looked out into the blackness. Bring the lamp. Nathalie obeyed. The faint light showed the hastening snowflakes, no more. Maybe they will listen to me. Nay, as I say, they shall. The witch followed with the swinging lamp in her hand, while they made their way in silence through the darkness and the snow, in between the bare rose bushes, over the wet, cold earth until they reached the trap door at the end of the garden that led to the witch's kitchen. Here she paused while Dirk raised the stone. Surely the earth shook then, he said. I felt it tremble beneath my feet. Hush, there is a light below. The witch peered over his shoulder and saw a faint glow rising from the open trap, while at that moment her own lamp went suddenly out. They stood in outer darkness. Will you dare descend? Muttered Nathalie. What should I fear? Came the low, wild answer, and Dirk put his foot on the ladder. The witch followed. They found themselves in the chamber and saw that it was lit by an immense fire, seated before which was an enormous man with his back towards them. He was dressed in black, and at his feet lay stretched a huge black hound. Good even, said Dirk in a low voice. The stranger turned a face as black as his garments. Round his neck he wore a collar of most brilliant red and purple stones. A cold night, he said, and again it seemed as if the earth rumbled and shook. You find our fire welcome, answered Dirk, but the witch crouched against the wall muttering to herself. A good heat, said the blackamoor. Dirk crossed the room, his arms folded on his breast, his head erect. What are you doing here? He asked. Warming myself. What have you to say to me? The blackamoor drew closer to the fire. Ugh, how cold it is, he said, and stuck out his legs and thrust them deep into the seething flames. Dirk drew still nearer. If you be what I think you have some reason in coming here. I have been to the palace. I sat under the Empress's chair while she talked to a pretty youth whose name is Theirry. Aha! It was cold in the palace. There was snow on the youth's garments as there is blood on yours, and the Emperor was there. Theirry has betrayed me, said the youth. The blackamoor took his legs from the fire, unscorched and untouched, and the hellhound rose and howled. He has betrayed you, and Isabeau accuses you to save herself, But the devils are on your side, since there is other work for you to do. Flee from Frankfort, and I will see that you fulfill your destiny. And now," he glanced over his shoulder, "the witch comes home tonight. Tonight the work here is done. Take the road through Frankfort." He stood up and his head touched the roof. The gems on his throat gave out long rays of light. The fire grew dim. The blackamoor changed into a thick column of smoke that spread. "Hell will not forsake you, Ursula of Rooselaare." Dirk fell back against the wall, thick vapours encompassing him. He put his hands over his face. When he looked up again the room was clear and lit by the beams of the dying fire. He gazed round for the witch, but Nathalie had gone. With a thick sob in his throat he sprang up the ladder into the outer air and rushed towards the desolate house. Desolate indeed, empty, dark and cold it stood, the snow drifting in through the open windows, the fires extinguished on the hearths, a dead place never more to be inhabited. Dirk leant against the door, breathing hard. Here was a crisis of his fate, betrayed by one whom he loved, deserted too, it seemed, since Nathalie had disappeared. The blackamoor, he remembered him as a vision, a delusion perhaps. Oh, how cold it was! Would his accusers come for him tonight? He crept to the gate that gave onto the street and listened. Out of the further darkness came a distant hurry and confusion of sound, horses, shouting, eager feet, a populace roused, on the heels of the dealer in black magic, armed with fire and sword for the witches. Dirk opened the gate, for the last time stepped from the witches' garden. He wondered if Theirry was with the oncoming crowd, yet he did not think so. Probably he was in the palace, probably he had repented already of what he had done. But the Empress had found her chance, her accusation falling first. Who would take his word against her? He listened to the noises of the approaching people, till through these another sound, nearer and stranger, made him turn his head. It came from the witch's house. "Nathalie!" called Dirk in a half hope. But the blackness rippled into fire, swift flames sprang up, a column of gold and scarlet enveloped house and garden in a curling embrace. Dirk ran out into the road where the glare of the fire lit the swirling snow for a trembling circle, and shading his eyes he stared at the flames that consumed all his books, his magic herbs and potions, the strange things, rich and beautiful, that Nathalie had gathered in her long evil life. Then he turned and ran down the street as the crowd surged in at the other end, to fall back upon one another aghast before the mighty flames that gave them mocking welcome. Their dismayed and angry shouts came to Dirk's ears as he ran through the snow. He fled the faster towards the eastern gate. It was not yet shut. Light of foot and swift he darted through before they could challenge him, perhaps even before the careless guards saw him. He was a fine runner, not easily fatigued, but he had already strained his endurance to the utmost, and after he had well cleared the city gates his limbs failed him and he fell to a walk. After a while he saw glimmering ahead of him a light. It was neither in a house nor carried in the hand, for it shone low on the ground, lower, it seemed to Dirk, than his own feet. He paused, listened, and proceeded cautiously for fear of the river. That must lie, he thought, very close to his left. As he neared the light he saw it to be a lantern that cast long rays across the clearing snowstorm. A glittering, trembling reflection beneath it told him it belonged to a boat roped to the bank. Dirk crept towards it, went on his knees in the snow and mud, and beheld a small empty craft, the lantern hanging at the prow. He paused. The waters rushing by steadily and angrily must be flowing towards the Rhine and the town of Cologne. He stepped into the boat that rocked while the water splashed beneath him, but with cold hands he undid the knotted rope. The boat trembled a moment, then sped on with the current as if glad to be freed. An oar lay in the bottom, with which for a while Dirk helped himself along, fearful lest the owners of the boat should pursue. Then he let himself float downstream as he might. The water lapped about him, and the snow fell on his unprotected and already soaked figure. He stretched himself along the bottom of the boat and hid his face in the cushioned seats. His anguished tears, the cruel cold, the steady sound of the unseen water, exhausted and numbed him till he fell into a sleep that was half a swoon, while the boat drifted towards the town. When he awoke he was still in the open country. The snow had ceased, but lay on the ground thick and untouched to the horizon. Dirk found it ill to move, for his limbs were frozen, his clothes wet and clinging to his wincing flesh, while his eyes smarted with his late weeping, and his head was racked with giddy pains. For a while he sat, remembering yesterday, till his face hardened and darkened, and he set his pale lips and crawled painfully out of the boat, which had been caught in a clump of stiff withered reeds by the flat river bank. Before him was a sweep of snow leading to the forest, and as he gazed at this with dimmed, hopeless eyes, a figure in a white monk's habit emerged from the trees. He carried a rude wooden spade in his hand and walked with a slow step. He was coming towards the river, and Dirk waited. As the stranger neared, he lifted his eyes that had hitherto been cast on the ground, and Dirk recognized Saint Ambrose of Menthon. Nevertheless, Dirk did not despair. Before the saint had recognized him, his part was resolved upon. Ambrose of Menthon gazed with pity and horror at the forlorn little figure shivering by the reeds. It was not strange that he did not at once know him. Dirk's face was of a ghastly hue, his eyes shadowed underneath, red and swollen, his lank hair clinging close to his small head, his clothes muddy, wet, and soiled, his figure bent. "Sir," he said, and his voice was weak and sweet, "have pity on an evil thing." He fell on his knees and clasped his hands on his breast. "Rise up," answered the saint. "What God has given me is yours, poor soul. Ye are very miserable." "More miserable than ye wot of," said Dirk through chattering teeth, still on his knees. "Do you not know me?" Ambrose of Menthon looked at him closely. "Alas," he murmured slowly, "I know you." Dirk beat his breast. "Mea culpa," he moaned, "mea culpa." "Rise, come with me," said the saint. "I will attend your wants." The youth did not move. "Will you solace my soul, sir?" he cried. "God must have sent you here to save my soul. For long days I have sought you." Saint Ambrose's face glowed. "Have ye, then, repented?" "Remorse and sorrow fill my heart," murmured Dirk. "I have cast off my evil comrades, renounced my vile gains, and journeyed into the loneliness to find God his pardon, and it seemed he would not hear me." "He hears all who come in grief and penitence," said the saint joyously, "and he has heard you, for has he not sent me to find you, even in this most desolate place?" "You feed me with hope," answered Dirk in a quivering voice, "and revive me with glad tidings. May I dare, I, poor lost wretch, to be uplifted and exalted?" "Poor youth," was the tender murmur. "Come with me." He led the way across the thick snow, Dirk following with downcast eyes and white cheeks. They skirted the forest and came upon a little hut set back and sheltered among the scattered trees. Saint Ambrose opened the rude door. "I am alone now," he said softly as he entered. "I had with me a frail holy youth who was travelling to Paris. Last night he died. I have just laid his body in the earth. His soul rests on the bosom of the Lord." Dirk stepped into the hut and stood meekly on the threshold, and Saint Ambrose glanced at him wistfully. "Maybe God has sent me this soul to tend and succor in place of that he has called home." Dirk whimpered humbly. "If I might think so." The saint opened an inner door. "Your garments are wet and soiled." A sudden colour stained Dirk's face. "I have no others." Ambrose of Menthon pointed to the inner chamber. "There Blaise died yestereve. There are his clothes. Enter and put them on." "It will be the habit of a novice?" asked Dirk softly. "Yea." Dirk bent and kissed the saint's fingers with ice-cold lips. "I have dared," he whispered, "to hope that I might die wearing the garb of God his servants, and now I dare even to hope that he shall grant my prayer." He stepped into the inner chamber and closed the door. End of section 21. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 22 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 22, Blaise. Ambrose of Menthon and his meek and humble follower rested at Chalons on their way to Paris. For many weeks they had begged from door to door, sleeping in some hermit's cell or by the roadside when the severity of the bitter nights permitted, occasionally finding shelter in a wayside convent. So patient, so courageous before hardship, so truly sad and remorseful, so grateful for the distant chance of ultimate pardon was Dirk, that the saint grew to love the penitent vagabond. No one eager to look for it could have found any fault with his behaviour. He was gentle as a girl, obedient as a servant, rigid in his prayers, and he had a strangely complete knowledge of the offices and penances of the Church. Silent and sorrowful often, taking no pleasure in anything save the saint's talk of paradise and holy things. Particularly he loved to hear of the dead youth Blaise, of his saintly life, of his desire to join the stern brotherhood of the Sacred Heart in Paris, of his fame as one beloved of God, of the convent's wish to receive him, of his great learning, of his beautiful death in the snowy evening. To all this Dirk listened with still attention, and from St. Ambrose's rapt and loving recital he gathered little earthly details of the subject of their speech, such as that he was from Flanders, of a noble family, that his immediate relatives were dead, that his years were no more than 20, and that he was dark and pale. For himself, Dirk had little to say. He described simply his shame and remorse after he had stolen the holy gold, his gradual sickening of his companions, the long torture of his awakening soul, his attempts to find the saint, and how, finally, after he had resolved to flee his evil life and enter a convent, he had run out of Frankfurt, found a boat waiting, and so drifted to St. Ambrose's feet. The saint, rejoicing in his penitence, suggested that he should enter the convent, whither they journeyed, with the tidings of the holy youth's death, and Dirk consented with humble gratitude. And so they passed through Chalons and rested in a deserted hut overlooking the waters of the Marne. Having finished their scanty meal, they were seated together under the rough shelter. The luxury of a fire was denied their austerity. A cold wind blew in and out of the ill-built doors, and a colourless light filled the mean, bare place. Dirk sat on a wooden stool, reading aloud the writings of Saint Jerome. He wore a coarse brown robe, very different from his usual attire, fastened round the waist with a rope into which was twisted a wooden rosary. His feet were encased in rude leather boots, his hands reddened with the cold. his face hollow and of a bluish pallor in which his eyes shone feverishly large and dark. His smooth hair hung on to his shoulders. He stooped in contrast with his usual erect carriage. Pausing on his low and gentle reading, he looked across at the saint. Ambrose of Menthon sat on a rough-hewn bench against the rougher wall. Weariness, exposure, and sheer weakness of body had done their work at last. Dirk knew that for 3 nights he had not slept. He was asleep now, or had swooned. His fair head fell forward on his breast, his hands hung by his side. As Dirk became assured that his companion was unconscious, he slowly rose and set down the holy volume. He was himself half-starved, cold to the heart and shuddering. He looked round the plaster walls, and the meek expression of his face changed to one of scorn, derision, and wicked disdain. He darted a bitter glance at the wan man and crept towards the door. Opening it softly, he gazed out. The scene was fair and lonely. The distant tourelle of Châlons rose clear and pointed against the winter clouds. Near by, the grey river flowed between its high banks, where the bare willows grew and the snow wreaths lay. Dirk took shivering steps into the open and turned towards the Marne. The keen wind penetrated his poor garments and lifted the heavy hair from his thin cheeks. He beat his breast, chafed his hands, and walked rapidly. Reaching the bank, he looked up and down the river. There was no one in sight, neither boat nor animal nor house to break the monotony of land, sky, and water. Only those distant towers of the town. Dirk walked among the twisted willows, then came to a pause. A little ahead of him were a black man and a black dog, both seated on the bank and gazing towards Châlons. The youth came a little nearer. "Good even," he said. "It is very cold." The blackamoor looked round. "Are you pleased with the way you travel?" he asked, nodding his head. "And your companion?" Dirk's face lowered. "How much longer am I to endure it?" "You must have patience," said the black man, "and endurance." "I have both," answered Dirk. "Look at my hands. They are no longer soft, but red and hard. My feet are galled and wounded in rough boots. I must walk till I am sick, then pray instead of sleeping. I see no fire, and scarcely do I touch food." "You will be rewarded, and revenged too. Oh ho ho! It is very cold, as you say, very cold." "What must I do?" asked Dirk. The black man rubbed his hands together. "You know, you know." Dirk's pinched, wan face grew intent and eager. "Am I to use this?" He touched the breast of his rough habit. "Yea." "Then shall I be left defenceless?" Dirk's voice shook a little. "If anything should happen, I would not, I could not. O Satanas, I could not be revealed." The blackamoor rose from among the willows. "Do you trust yourself and me?" he asked. Dirk put his thin hand over his eyes. "Yea, master." "Then you know what to do. You will not see me for many years. When you have triumphed, I shall come." He turned swiftly and ran down the bank, the hound at his heels. One after another they leapt into the waters of the Marne and disappeared with an inner sound. Dirk straightened himself and set his lips. He re-entered the hut to find Ambrose of Menthon still against the wall, now indeed wearily asleep. Dirk came softly forward. Slowly and cautiously he put his hand into his bosom and drew out a small green-coloured vial. With his eyes keenly on the saint he broke the seal, then crept close. By St. Ambrose's side hung his rosary, every bead smooth with the constant pressure of his lips. Dirk raised the heavy crucifix attached and poured onto it the precious drop contained in the vial. St. Ambrose did not wake nor move. Dirk drew away and crouched against the wall, cursing the bitter wind with fierce eyes. When the saint awoke, Dirk was on the broken stool reading aloud the writings of Saint Jerome. "Is it still light?" asked Ambrose of Menthon amazedly. "It is the dawn," answered Dirk. "And I have slept the night through." The saint dragged his stiff limbs from the seat and fell on his knees in a misery of prayer. Dirk closed the book and watched him, watched his long fingers twining in the beads of his rosary, watched him kiss the crucifix again and again. Then he too knelt, his face hidden in his hands. He was the first to rise. "Master, shall we press on to Paris?" he asked humbly. The saint lifted dazed eyes from his devotions. "Yea," he said, "yea." Dirk began putting together in a bundle their few books and the wooden platter in which they collected their broken food, this being their all. "I dreamt last night of paradise," said Saint Ambrose faintly. "The floor was so thick strewn with close little flowers, red, white, and purple, and it was warm as Italy in May." Dirk swung the bundle onto his shoulder and opened the door of the hut. They passed out into the dreary landscape and took their slow way along the banks of the Marne. Until midday they did not pause, scarcely spoke. Then they passed through a little village, and the charitable gave them food. That night they slept in the open, under shelter of a hedge, and Ambrose of Menthon complained of weakness. Dirk, waking in the dark, heard him praying, heard too the rattle of the wooden rosary. When the light came and they once more recommenced their journey, the saint was so feeble he was fain to lean on Dirk's shoulder. "I think I am dying," he said. His face was flushed, his eyes burning. He smiled continuously. "Let me reach Paris," he added, "that I may tell the brethren of Blaye." The youth supporting him wept bitterly. Towards noon they met a woodsman's cart that helped them on their way. That night they spent in the stable of an inn. The next day they descended into the valley of the Seine, and by the evening reached the gates of Paris. As the bells all over the beautiful city were ringing to vespers, they arrived at their destination, an old and magnificent convent, surrounded with great gardens set near the river bank. The monks were singing the Magnificat, their thin voices came clearly on the frosty air. "Fecit potentiam in brachio suo, dispersit subos mente cordi su." Ambrose of Menthon took his feeble hand from Dirk's arm and sank on his knees. "Deposuit potentes de sede, et exaltavit humilies." But Dirk's pale lips curled, and he gazed at the sun flaming beyond the convent walls. There was a haughty challenge in his brooding eyes. "Esurientes implevit bones, et divites dimisit inenes, suscepit Israel puerum sum, recordatus misericordiae suae." The saint murmured the chanted words and clasped his hands on his breast, while the sun brightened vividly above the wild waters of the Seine. "Sicut locutus ead patre nostros, Abraham et semini eius en secula." The chant faded away on the still evening, but the saint remained kneeling. "Master," whispered Dirk, "shall we not go in to them?" Ambrose of Menthon raised his fair face. "I am dying," he smiled. "A keen flame licks up my blood and burns my heart to ashes. Sustinuit anime me in verbo uius." His voice failed, he sank forward and his head fell against the grey beds of rue and fennel. "Alas! Alas!" cried Dirk. He made no attempt to bring assistance nor called aloud, but stood still gazing with intent eyes at the unconscious man. But when the monks came out of the chapel and turned 2 by 2 towards the convent, Dirk pulled off his worn cap. "Divinum auxilium mancat semper nobiscum." "Amen," said Dirk. Then he ran lightly forward and flung himself before the procession. "My father!" he cried with a sob in his voice. The priests stopped, the amens still trembling on their lips. "Ambrose of Menthon lies within your gates, a dying man," said Dirk meekly and sadly. With little exclamations of awe and grief the grey-clad figures followed him to where the saint lay. "He has done with his body," said an old monk, holding up the dying man. The flushed sky faded behind them. The saint stirred and half opened his eyes. "Blay," he whispered. "Blay." He tried to point to Dirk, who knelt at his feet. "He will tell you." His eyes closed again. He strove to pray. The De Profundis trembled on his lips. He made a sudden upward gesture with his hands, smiled and died. For a while there was silence among them, broken only by a short sob from Dirk. Then the monks turned to the ragged, emaciated youth who crouched at the dead feet. Dirk roused himself as if from a silent prayer, made the sign of the cross, and rose. "Who art thou?" they asked reverently. "The youth, Blay, my fathers," he answered humbly. End of section 22. Recording by Molly Craig. Section 23 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2. The Pope. Chapter 1. Cardinal Luigi Caprarola. The evening service in the Basilica of St. Peter was over. Pilgrims, peasants, and monks had departed. The last chant of the officiating cardinal's train still trembled on the incense-filled air when a man, richly and fantastically dressed, entered the bronze door and advanced a little way down the centre aisle. He bent his head to the altar, then paused and looked about him with the air of a stranger. He was well used to magnificence, but this first sight of the chapel of the Vatican caused him to catch his breath. To one side of the high altar stood a purple chair and a purple footstool, the seat of the cardinal, sometimes of the pontiff. This splendid and holy beauty abashed, yet inspired the stranger. He leant against one of the smooth columns and gazed at the altar. The novices were putting out the candles and preparing to close the church. Their swift feet made no sound. Silently the little stars about the high altar disappeared, and deeper shadows fell over the aisles. The stranger watched the white figures moving to and fro until no light remained, save the purple and scarlet lamps that cast rich rays over the gold and stained the pure lilies into colour. Then he left his place and went slowly towards the door. Already the bronze gates had been closed. Only the entrance to the Vatican and one leading into a side street remained open. Several monks issued from the chapels and left by this last. The stranger still lingered. Down from the altar came the 2 novices, prostrated themselves, then proceeded along the body of the church. They extinguished the candles in the candelabra set down the aisles, and a bejewelled darkness fell on the basilica. The stranger stood under a malachite and platinum shrine that blinded with the glimmer and sparkle of golden mosaic. Before it burnt graduated tapers. One of the novices came towards it, and the man waiting there moved towards him. "Sir," he said in a low voice, "may I speak to you?" He spoke in Latin, with the accent of a scholar, and his tone was deep and pleasant. The novice paused and looked at him, gazed intently, and beheld a very splendid person. A man in the prime of life, tall above the ordinary, and above the ordinary, gorgeous to the eyes. His face was sunburnt to a hue nearly as dark as his light bronze hair, and his western eyes showed clearly bright and pale in contrast. In his ears hung long pearl and gold ornaments that touched his shoulders. His dress was half Eastern, of fine violet silk and embroidered leather. He carried in his belt a curved scimitar inset with turquoise. By his side a short gold sword, and against his hip he held a purple cap ornamented with a plume of peacock's feathers, and wore long gloves fretted in the palm with the use of rein and sword. But more than these details did the stranger's face strike the novice, a face almost as perfect as the marks of the gods found in the temples. The rounded and curved features were over full for a man, and the expression was too indifferent, troubled, almost weak to be attractive, but taken in itself the face was notably beautiful. Noting the novice's intent gaze, a flush crept into the man's dark cheek. "I am a stranger," he said. "I want to ask you of Cardinal Caprarola. He officiated here today?" "Yea," answered the novice. "What can I tell you of him?" "He is the greatest man in Rome. Now his holiness is dying," he added. "Why, I have heard of him, even in Constantinople. I think I saw him many years ago, before I went to the East." "It may be, sir," he said. "His Eminence was a poor youth, as I might be. He came from Flanders." "It was in Courtrai I thought I saw him." "I know not if he was ever there. He became a disciple of Saint Ambrose of Menthon when very young, and after the saint's death he joined the convent of the Sacred Heart in Paris. You have heard of that, sir?" "I have heard nothing. I have been away many years. This man, Cardinal Caprarola, he is a saint also, is he not? Tell me more of him." "Born of Dendermonde he was, sir, Louis his name, in our tongue Luigi. Blay, the name he took in the convent. He came to Rome 7, nay, it must be 8 years ago. His Holiness created him Bishop of Ostia, then of Caprarola, which last name he retains now he is Cardinal. He is the greatest man in Rome," repeated the novice. "And a saint?" asked the other with a wistful eagerness. "Certes, when he was a youth he was famous for his holy, austere life. Now he lives in magnificence as befits a prince of the church. He is very holy." "There was a great service here today?" the stranger asked. "Yea, very many pilgrims were here." "I grieve that I was too late. Think you Cardinal Caprarola would see one unknown to him?" "If the errand warranted it, sir." "I seek peace. If it be anywhere, it is in the hands of this servant of God. My soul is sick. Will he help me heal it?" "Yea, I do think so." The youth turned as he spoke towards the little side door. "I must close the basilica, sir," he added. The stranger seemed to rouse himself from depths of unhappy thoughts, and followed through the quivering gloom. "Where should I find the Cardinal?" he asked. "His palace lies in the Via de San Giovanni in Laterano. Any will tell you the way, sir." The novice opened the door. "God be with you." "And with you." The stranger stepped into the open, and the church door was locked behind him. The purple afterglow still lingered over Rome. It was May and sweetly warm. As the stranger crossed the piazza of St. Peter, the breeze was like the touch of silk on his face. He walked slowly, and presently hesitated, looked round the ruined temples, broken palace and walls. There were people about, not many, mostly monks. He turned toward the Arch of Titus. The ladies laughed and stared as he passed. One took a flower from her hair and threw it after him, at which he frowned, blushed, and hastened on. He had never been equal to the admiration he roused in women, though he disliked neither them nor their admiration. He carried still on his wrist the mark of a knife left there by a Byzantine princess who had found his face fair and his wooing cold. Passing the fountain of Meta Sudans and the remains of the Flavian amphitheatre, he gained the Via de San Giovanni in Laterano, leading to the Caillomontana gate. Here he drew a little apart from the crowd and looked about him. In the distance the Vatican and the Castel San Angelo showed faintly against the remote Apennines. He could distinguish the banner of the emperor hanging slackly in the warm air, the little lights in St. Peter's. A few moments brought him to the magnificent gates of the Villa Caprarola. They stood open upon a garden of flowers, just gleamingly visible in the dusk. The stranger hesitated in the entrance, fixing his gaze on the luminous white walls of the palace that showed between the boughs of citron and cypress. This cardinal, this prince, who was the greatest man in Rome, which was to say in Christendom, had strangely captured his imagination. He liked to think of him as an obscure and saintly youth devoting his life to the service of God, rising by no arts or intrigues, but by the pure will of his master, solely until he dominated the great empire of the West. The stranger, now at his beautiful gates, had been searching for peace for many years, in many lands, and always in vain. In Constantinople he had heard of the holy Frankish priest, who was already a greater power than the old and slowly dying pope, and it had comforted his tired heart to think that there was one man in a high place set there by God alone, one, too, of a pure life and noble soul. If any could give him promise of salvation, if any could help him to redeem his wasted, weak life, it would be he, this cardinal, who could not know evil save as a name. With this object he came to Rome. He wished to lay his sins and penitence at the feet of him who had been a meek and poor novice, and now by his virtues was Luigi Caprarola, as mighty as the emperor and as innocent as the angels. Shame and awe for a while held him irresolute. How could he dare relate his miserable and horrible story to this saint? But God had bidden him, and the holy were always merciful. He walked slowly between the dim flowers and bushes to the stately columned portico. With a thickly beating heart and a humble carriage, he mounted the low, wide steps and stood at the cardinal's door, which should open on a marble vestibule dimly lit with a soft roseate violet colour. 2 huge negroes wearing silver collars and tiger skins were on guard at each column of the door, and as the newcomer set foot within the portals one of them struck the silver bell attached to his wrist. Instantly appeared a slim and gorgeous youth, habited in black, a purple flower fastened at his throat. The stranger took off his cap. "This is the residence of his Eminence Cardinal Caprarola?" he asked, and the hint of hesitation always in his manner was accentuated. "Yea," the youth bowed gracefully. "I am his Eminence's secretary, Messer Paolo Orsini. I do desire to see the cardinal." "What is your purpose, sir?" "One neither political nor worldly." He paused, flushed, then added, "I would confess to his Eminence. I have come from Constantinople for that alone." "The cardinal hears confession in the basilica." "Certes, I know, yet I would crave to see him privately. I have matters relating to my soul to put before him. Surely he will not refuse me." The stranger's voice was unequal, his bearing troubled, as the secretary curiously observed. Penitents, anxious for their souls, did not often trouble the cardinal, but Orsini's aristocratic manner showed no surprise. "His Eminence," he said, "is ever loath to refuse himself to the faithful. I will ask him if he will give you audience. What, sir, is your quality and your name?" "I am unknown here," answered the other humbly. Lately I have come from Constantinople, where I held an office at the court of Basle, but by birth I am a Frank, of the cardinal's own country." "Sir, your name?" repeated the elegant secretary. "I have been known by many, but let his Eminence have the truth. I am Theirry, born of Dendermonde." Paolo Orsini bowed again. "I will acquaint the cardinal," he said. "Will you await me here?" He was gone, as swiftly and silently as he had come. Theirry, hand to brow, gazed about him. He had seen nothing more lavishly splendid in the East. Cardinal Caprarola was no ascetic, whatever the youth Blaise may have been. And for a moment Theirry was bewildered and disappointed. Could a saint live thus? Then he reflected. Good it was to consider that God, and not the devil, who so often used beauty and wealth for his lures, had given a man this. He walked up and down, none to watch him but the 4 silent and motionless negroes. The exquisite lights, the melody of the fountain, the sweet odours that rose from the slow curling blue vapours, the gorgeous surroundings, lulled and soothed. He felt that at last, after his changeful wanderings, his restless unhappiness, he had found his goal and his haven. In this man's hands was redemption. This man was housed as befitted an ambassador of the Lord of Heaven. Paolo Orsini, in person as rare and splendid as the palace, returned. "The cardinal will receive you, sir," he said. If the message astonished him, he did not show it. He bowed before Theirry and preceded him up the magnificent stairs. Paolo Orsini opened a gilt door and held it wide while Theirry entered. Then he bowed himself away, saying, "His Eminence will be with you presently." Theirry found himself in a fair-sized chamber, walls, floor and ceiling composed of ebony and mother of pearl. Incense burnt in a gold brazier, the rich scent of it glowing almost insupportable in the close confined space. The dim blue light, the strong perfumes were confusing to the senses. His pulses throbbed, his heart leapt. It did not seem as if he could speak to the cardinal. Then it seemed as if he could tell him everything and leave absolved. Yet, what was there in the place reviving memories that had been thrust deep into his heart for years? A certain room in an old house in Antwerp, with the August sunlight over the figure of a young man gilding a devil, a chamber in the college at Basle, and 2 youths bending over a witch's fire, a dark wet night and the sound of a weak voice coming to him, Frankfort, and a garden blazing with crimson roses. Other scenes, crowded, horrible. Why did he think of them here, in this remote land among strangers, here where he had come to purge his soul? There was a shiver of silks, and the cardinal stepped into the chamber. Theirry sank on his knees and bowed his throbbing head. The cardinal slowly closed the door. A low rumble of thunder sounded. A great storm was gathering over the Tyrrhenian Sea. End of section 23. Recording by Molly Craig.